One. Hello, and we're live. And I'm once again with my good friend TJ Martinell. By the way, TJ Martinell, if you don't already know, is a journalist, an author, a podcaster, a motorcycle enthusiast, and all around Renaissance man. Links to his main website, TJ Martinell, as well as his Twitter, are in the description. Anyway, how you doing tonight, TJ?
I'm doing pretty well. Went on a good motorcycle ride today. I have this shirt that I ordered that's padded on the inside on like the elbows and the chest and the back and everything like that. And the reason I got it was so that I could wear pretty much any jacket within reason that I wanted to. So I ordered last year after watching the movie Miracle, which was about the 1980 US hockey team that beat the Soviet Union. I got into kind of this 80s like USA craze. So I ordered on eBay in the middle of the night this because I was watching it like at 12 o'clock in the morning. I ordered this huge 1980s USA jacket. So if people go on my Twitter account, they can see the huge jacket that I have. So I was able to wear that today with my Honda Rebel. So it kind of just works well with that. So that was fun taking it out for the first time. And but it also means I got this World War II Commando green wool jacket that I really don't like to wear. There's a couple of jackets I don't like wearing in public if I'm not on my motorcycle. Like my leather jacket, I have one. It's a motorcycle jacket, but it's not padded, but I wouldn't wear it anywhere except if I was on my motorcycle. So there's certain things I just won't wear because it's pretentious. You know, the thing about clothing and attire and stuff like that, it's not about what you're wearing, it's about how you're wearing it. And if you're wearing motorcycle clothing and you're not on a motorcycle, it just seems really weird. So it's like that. Well, that's one of the reasons I really hated hipsters is like, for example, I grew up chopping wood. As a kid, we would order like a cord of wood and we would split it, we would cut it, we would stack it and do all that kind of stuff during the fall season. So I'm pretty good with a hammer. I'm pretty good with an axe and a hatchet. You know, I know all about, you know, and I can split stuff pretty well, as my relatives can attest. So when I see these yokels, these jokesters in Seattle wearing these, trying to look like lumberjacks, right? They got the groomed beard and they got the flannel
shirts. Yeah.
It really bothered me because it's like, I doubt these people had ever touched an axe in their life.
Yeah, maybe in Minecraft. That's about as close as I can.
Oh God. Talk about a weird, you know, I got relatives that are really young relatives. We're talking under the age of 10 who are in love with Minecraft. And and you're even older than me, but I don't know how much your generation was into video games. But, you know, I grew up like with the original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, whatever. And I remember how big of a deal it was. One of the questions we were always asking with the video game is like, how much better are the graphics going to be than the games before it? So for example, watching 3D graphics on the Nintendo 64 for me was like, it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. Playing Super Mario, Mario Kart 64, playing Legend of Zelda and all these Star Fox, whatever. It was some of the coolest things I'd ever seen. So to see 20 something, even more, we're closer to 30 years than 20 years. To see kids playing these games that are like 2D, 3D, like a retrograde on graphics. It's such a weird experience because it's almost like they've gotten to the point where they don't, I don't know. It's such a weird phenomenon for me to be watching these kids playing these games where the graphics are like they're not that great.
Well, and maybe it harkens back to how you opened up, where you went into this America, fuck yeah kind of phase after seeing. By the way, that was a great film. We're talking about the about the 1980 hockey game. By the way, I'm dating myself. I'm old enough to actually remember that game.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the things. Yeah, that's one of the. I don't want to say regrets because like I had no control of it, but I understand nostalgia is always you're always overlooking stuff. So it's like, okay, fair enough. But I think the 80s was really a great decade. Maybe not so much in the fashion sense, Those parachute, those parachute pants,
the blue eyeshadow, the parachute pants.
Oh,
yeah,
well, some of the girls, their like outfits and their frizzy hair and all that kind of stuff.
Hair,
it's like,
the big hair, man. In high school, I remember the giant hair they all had.
Yeah. The beehive.
It was. But it's funny. I remember my 10-year high school reunion, which happened in the late '90s, and the girls, because at at least I don't know how they do it now, but they had your yearbook photo would be on your little name tag, right? So all the girls were so embarrassed of their hair, they would like covering up the photo and just having the name, on their outfit or whatever. But because that giant '80s hair. So you could just, anyone who's listening to this, you just Google '80s hair and you'll get an idea what we're talking about. TJ doesn't really remember that, but
I mean, and in some ways I do, because some of my younger and when I say younger, I mean like they were in their 20s when I was growing up. A lot of the '80s carried over into the early '90s, so I remember the hairstyle that they wore there was still this kind of, and it all depends on like what part of the country, because it's all about where did these styles develop and where was the last place that they really kind of picked up on. I don't know where the West Coast or the Pacific Northwest was on that kind of stuff back then, but
things were slower back then. There was no internet, right? So things always moved. The speed of fashion wasn't like lightning speed, like the way. Well, I don't know. I mean, there was TV, right? So I guess TV set the standard.
Well, I mean, think about like what happens now. There's some incident in some rural town in Indiana. Somebody with a smartphone or with a, takes a video of it, uploads it on Twitter, and it can go, theoretically, it doesn't always do this, but theoretically it can go viral internationally within a few hours. Yeah. It's just such a, I was watching that movie War Game with Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy. I think that was her name.
Ali Sheedy,
yeah. She was a cute girl. And what was funny is how he was using one of those old computers to like hook up to the internet with the dial-up.
Yeah.
And I just thought how like kind of cool. It's like I always have this kind of romantic view of like the earliest phases of any kind of development. Like how cool it would have been in the early days of working in Silicon Valley in the early, 70s, 80s, where it's not what it is now, where it's where there's genuine innovation going on. It's become a hub that's building something. And then people are going there for purely just for the to be part of that.
Yeah, they're not there to try to become the next, billionaire, the next Zuckerberg. They're going there because they actually have a passion about doing this. Like, actually, I actually learned how to program in BASIC on an Atari 800 computer.
Yeah, I think that I've been having this discussion with friends of mine about technology and whether it's been a good thing or a bad thing. And one of the conclusions, and I think it's probably right, is they said it's not whether it's not taking us forward and it's not taking us backwards. It's just a trade-off. Like we gain something and we lose something as a result, because I think that it's great that we have a lot of this technology and it allows us to do what we're doing right now. At the same time, let's not pretend like there's not bad things as a result. And so the question is, what do you do in response to that? But going back to the issue of like how fast news travels and all that kind of stuff, I think this is the problem with maybe not you and Vince and Rob and a couple other guys like in their 40s or whatever. I'm talking like guys in their 60s and older. They really don't understand how quickly things change now in society and culture, where our morality can change within a 24-hour period. Like people are they're permanently tabula rasa, where their values and views can change on a whim by some decree. It's such a weird, it's almost like there's like a signal that's sent out, like, oh, this is what we're supposed to think now,
yes, it does seem that way, especially the older you get, the more it, for lack of a better phrase, freaks you out how quickly the zeitgeist, I hate that word, but I don't know what else to call it, can change of the collective consciousness, where these things used to be a lot slower in moving.
Yeah, and this is where the Romans, I was listening to a podcast on the Romans. The interesting thing about the Romans is that they prided themselves on being, when I say conservative, I mean in a philosophical sense of they were traditionalists. They were traditionalists in a genuine sense, not like fake traditionalists you hear today where, something before the 90s is beyond the pale to even discuss. They were people who they were interested in preserving the way things have been done, and they really didn't see any reason to change them because that's how they worked. It's like, why do we need to change something that always works? And so that's kind of the difference in mindset from a, I don't want to say progressive in a political sense, but a progressive where things always need to get better. You can't just be content with the way things are. Now, that can lead to technological innovations. That can lead to a lot of cool things. But at the same time, it causes upheavals in societies. Whereas in other, and I can just look that we can just look at this by observing. There's a lot of countries around the world that are dysfunctional, or maybe they're poor or whatever, but things are pretty much remain the same and they're pretty stable. They're not going to have a collapse of any kind culturally or socially, because it's just that they've always been doing things that way. So they're, for lack of a better word, they're resilient. They have a natural disaster and they just pick up and move on from what happened. It's like, I don't think America could stand, for example, there was that, I think it was Indonesia that back in like 2002 had that,
tsunami.
Tsunami that killed like 200,000 people. Can you imagine what would happen in America if 200,000 people died from a natural disaster? Like within like 3 days died 200,000 people. I mean, you'd have like genuine breakdown of civil order, like panic. Who knows? It would depend on how it happened, but I mean, Americans today are easily spooked. That's just kind of been my observation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of Americans don't realize how easy they have it, and this could go in a million directions once I say this, but I think that's one of the challenges we have is things are so good. Like you're right. We don't really have to worry about those kind of disasters happening, or we haven't had to in a very, very long time. And the biggest things we have to worry about, it seems, are microaggressions or those kind of things. And that's why I think our priorities are not quite in line with reality. If that made any sense at all.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about writing a novel at some point. I personally enjoyed Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. I thought it was a good book. I don't think it was the greatest fictional story, but it was just a fascinating, it was a much better version. Like both him and Ayn Rand wrote, they put their political philosophies, and it wasn't even thinly disguised. Like it's blatantly, he's pushing his beliefs into the book. And so Dan, the difference is he wrote it in a much more readable and engaging way, and in a less wonky way. Like she wrote it as like almost like this allegorical like sermon. It was, it was like 40
it was boring. It was boring.
Yeah, it was boring. Yeah.
I only read the Galt. I didn't read her other fiction work, so I can't speak to those, but
Yeah, I'm one of those people who's actually read her political philosophy books, and her political philosophy books are much more readable and engaging because she's not trying to tell a fictional story. She's just trying to write it. But I wanted to write a book about a society that in the same vein as Starship Troopers, where they're not Luddites, where they're destroying technology for an economic purposes. Like they're not trying to machines destroy jobs or whatever. What they're doing is what they're trying to avoid is convenience and comfort that's too great. Like almost like they feel like the young have to go through a period of struggle before they get to enjoy the fruits of technology and convenience that comes with it. So it's so interesting. Like for today, we don't allow people under the age of 21 to drink. What about a society that doesn't allow people under the age of 21 to use a smartphone or the internet? And this is I'm not talking we do this as a society today, but it raises an interesting question of like, what is more dangerous to a 12, 13-year-old child, having a beer or a glass of wine or having a smartphone?
Yeah, where he could watch a donkey show. Yeah.
I'm thinking more of just like what it does to his brain, because they
Well, yeah, that's what I was talking about. What does a donkey show do to a 12-year-old's brain? You know what I mean? Like that was, our friend the Beckloff would say that, what is it like? We live in a world where every 10-year-old is 2 clicks away from a donkey show. Like that's, in my opinion, not healthy for a society as a whole.
I wrote that book, The Pilgrim's Digress, that came out through Terror House magazine, and I really didn't examine in that book the issue of the internet. I wasn't really interested in doing that, and maybe I just wanted to write a short book. I didn't really want to make it a comprehensive book, and that's a nice thing, because now I can write a separate novel that just looks at the internet and just says, okay, so it's like, for example, you can't rent a car today if you're under the age of 25 in America.
Oh, is it 25? Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's like 25. So I went to rent a car recently when I was in between vehicles, and they were like, oh, are you over the age of 25? And I was thinking, well, aside from the beard didn't throw you off. I was like thinking, I just was more than like, we are having discussions about allowing underage, like juveniles to vote in elections. We're having debates about whether they're able to change think about this, John. A child has the authority to change, but has in our society, it's acceptable for them to decide what gender they are, but not whether they can have a glass of wine, a sip of beer, and not whether they can rent a car or drive. And so my argument would be, if they're not able to drive a car, if we can't trust them to drive a car, why should we trust them with these other things that are far more important and consequential? Like, this is where the rationale, this is where it's so easy for me as a writer to bring this stuff up, because people didn't really think about it. So in a novel, let's say you have it where there's almost this separate classes of society, where kind of like in Starship Troopers, there's a separation between citizen and a civilian. Citizens have
citizens
citizens have privileges because they've earned it. So
well, they also have responsibilities. Like that was Heinlein's thing, was that the difference between a citizen and a civilian was they had privileges, not necessarily, but they had the responsibilities where civilians didn't.
Right, and that's why he doesn't call them rights, because he's like, no, you had to earn the right to vote. You had to earn the right to participate in higher levels of society and politics. So my thought would be, in a novel, creating a society where you have two separate classes. You have juveniles, which can be of any age, and then you have adults who are allowed access to things like the internet and smartphones and all this other stuff. Whereas you could be theoretically 34, 50 years old and still not be allowed to touch all this stuff because you haven't proven yourself mature enough to handle those things. And so, and it would be so easy to put into a conversation where they say, why don't I get to decide for myself, whether or not I get to look at these things, and say, well, probably the same reason we don't let you drink at age 5, or like we had alcohol, like whatever it is. It's just like, but it's raising the question of looking at what our society, the inconsistency of modern American society. In Washington State, if you are under the age of 21, you can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't run a car.
Buy weed, or because you
can't buy weed, and you can't buy a pistol. Yeah, and you can't buy a pistol. What you can do on the age of 21 is you can go on and go pretty much to any site on the internet that you want to. You can have a smartphone. You can
join them. You can join the military.
You can join the military at 17. You can get married at 17. You can get tested for HIV at age 15 without your parents' consent in our state.
Well, you can have an abortion. I think you can have an abortion.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's pretty much like you can do a lot of things in our state with as a juvenile. And so
you can't rent a car until you're 25. Yeah,
well, yeah, it's just like
I'm just think about this for a second. You could actually go like 6,000 miles or 10,000 miles on the other side of the world, fight and die and kill in a war, but you can't rent a car. Yeah, you could drive it. You could drive like a $10 million tank, but you can't rent a car. You know, it's like I don't know.
I mean that almost would make a very interesting, like not Rambo update book or movie, but just an interesting concept of like some kid at 17 who goes and fights in Afghanistan and kills a whole bunch of people, comes home at 19, and he's not allowed to own the guns that he used over there. He's not allowed to rent his own car when he drove a tank or was in a gunship or something like that. He can't
buy a beer when he comes back.
Yeah, he can't buy a beer when there was just booze probably lying around all over his barracks, back over in Afghanistan. And he's basically treated like a child, whereas over there he was, given responsibilities that meant whether he lived or died, depending on how he dealt with them. And I think that was part of that, the First Blood film that really hit home for a lot of people is where at the very end, John's talking about how he was in charge.
Breaks down to his colonel when he was talking about how over there he was, drove multi-million-dollar equipment out here, back in the U.S. He can't get a job pumping gas. I don't know if you know this, but that film was based on a novel.
I read it. I read it in college.
Oh, you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The author of that novel actually he wrote another one of my favorite kind of spy books called Brotherhood of the Rose. I don't know if you ever read that one, but that was an enjoyment as well. But but anyway, that plays on what you were saying. Please keep going. Sorry, I interrupted.
I was just saying, so what happened with David Morrell is that he was a professor at some university.
That's the author of the book, David Morrell. Yeah. I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah, David Morrell wrote this novel based on, he had a bunch of students who'd been Vietnam vets. And this is what I actually admire about this guy, is he had a lot of students kind of pushing back against him saying, why do I need to listen to you? What do you know? They were kind of just taking out their angst and anxiety. And rather than push back against them or lash out or punish them, he actually sat down with them and talked to them and talked through what they were dealing with, like the PTSD and their inability to. So he wrote this book to really explore the issues that these guys were dealing with. So I don't think that there was maybe one person that he based Rambo off of, but I think
a composite. It was a composite.
It was a composite because I remember he dedicated the book to a specific person, and I just think that the other interesting thing about the book is that the book is far more. It's totally different. I think what throws a lot of people off is that when they made the movie, Rambo's the good guy. In the book, Rambo is actually the villain. He's the protagonist, but he's the villain in some sense. I don't think there is a good guy in that book. Actually, I don't think there is I think that was part of the depressing part of the book is, it starts out the same as the movie, but then he ends up just killing. I
think it starts out where Rambo is the good guy, and then he crosses a line where he starts killing innocents.
He just starts killing. Well, he kills a bunch of police officers in the station. Yeah. I mean, he guts that one guy with the cutthroat razor, and then he goes and I remember reading that passage. I was I put the book down. I was like, whoa, this guy really, because I'd seen the movie before this. So I was like, I totally did not know what to expect with this book. And so I was reading the book and then I was like, whoa, this is not the movie. Because in the movie, I'll get to that interesting part of that in a second. But in the book, he kills dozens of National Guard. Like he just goes on a complete killing spree to the point where he is clearly irredeemable. Like there is no redemption for him, and he kind of knows that, and he's almost like this guy who's just looking for someone to end his life, which is in the end of the book what happens. I don't know if you know this, but so they were shooting the John Rambo film, the First Blood film, and they had already decided that Rambo wasn't going to kill anybody in this film. Because if you actually watch the film, nobody dies. There's only one death in the entire film. And it's the idiot police guy who took his seatbelt off of his helicopter and he was trying to shoot John Rambo against orders. His police chief was telling him to not shoot him. So he was clearly going against orders, and then he fell out of the helicopter. So Rambo didn't kill him or anybody else. But at the end of the film, they had been shooting this film with Kirk Douglas was playing Troutman. And in the original version of the film, Rambo begs Troutman to kill him.
Kirk Douglas. No.
In the original version of the film that was never released, Kirk Douglas was playing Troutman, and they shot a scene that you can see on the DVD special, like I think in the special features, where he shoots John Rambo at the end. He kills him because John Rambo begs him to. Yeah. Okay. And so they shot this, or they. Well,
who did Kirk Douglas play in the?
He played Troutman. The Green Beret.
No, that wasn't Kirk Douglas.
Well, not in the movie. Well, I'm getting to that point really quickly. What happened is, So what happened is they showed this to test audiences, and according to one of the producers, the audience was like wanting to lynch them. Like, who did this? Because they were rooting for Rambo the entire film, and then he dies at the end. And like he said, it went dead silent. And then somebody says, "Whoever made that scene needs to be shot." and so they were watching. They're like, "Okay, we've got it. Like, we cannot kill this guy." And Sylvester Stallone said the same thing. He goes, and one of the problems was they looked at John Rambo and they saw Rocky Balboa, because Rocky had come out a couple of years before.
Rocky had come out, earlier,
yeah. So they're like, we can't kill Rocky. Like, we can't do that. And also Rambo's too. And then he said also, Sylvester Stallone made this point. He goes, what message is this going to send to all those Vietnam vets? The message that it will send is that suicide or being shot or killed is the only way out. I mean, that could have led to mass shooting, some sort of mass shooting or killing. He's like, we can't do this. Well, Kirk Douglas to budge on this. He said this is he literally said it was the politically correct version of this film. Like, it was the politically correct interpretation of the story. And it got so bad, and Kirk Douglas would not back down. So finally he left the movie. He said, I won't continue to shoot the rest of the film, because they didn't I'm not sure what happened, but he backed down. Yeah. So they brought in the other actor, literally brought him on the set, and he just said, I have no idea what I'm doing. You're gonna have to walk me through this film. And what was so funny is, like, he nailed that role of this Green Beret commander colonel who had recruited Rambo. Is like, he goes, when someone says, what do you mean he's yours? I recruited him. I trained him. I fought with him in Vietnam for 3 years. I say that makes him mine.
Yeah.
And he just says it
there was a very poignant scene in that when they knew that Rambo had stolen a radio from one of the guardsmen. Yeah. And he wouldn't answer when they were, but then the colonel uses the call sign that they used in Vietnam. And that's what gets him to break radio silence. And they triangulate his position because of that. And he's saying, I'm the last one, sir. And he's like, no, you're not the last one. There's also like Ramirez or whatever. He's like, no,
Ortega.
Ortega. Okay.
I can't remember. It was, I know which one you're talking about. The one he visits his the family at the beginning of the film. And the family's like, yeah, he died from Agent Orange.
Yeah. Cancer. Yeah. And he's like, he's the last one. And that was also kind of foreshadowing the fatalistic ending that this would have. And like you said, they didn't kill him, but that was, he had kind of resigned himself to that. Like, I'm the last one. And, and so it was kind of this weird, because you could kind of say the colonel was almost like a surrogate father to him. Because, like you said,
definitely
owns him, and that was it. Because he was the one guy he would still talk to, because he had, been through it with them. He had made him into what he was.
Right. And what was funny is he said there were so many good. I got relatives of mine. We watched that film. There's so many good lines in that film. One of the ones from that scene is where he says, "Well, John, we can't have you out there wasting friendly civilians." And he goes, "There are no friendly civilians."
That's Vietnam. There was his thing, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and it's I can't remember what he said. Oh, then he says the famous line, they drew first blood, not me.
They drew first blood, yeah.
And what was funny is, clearly Troutman. There's a couple scenes that are pretty after that where it's kind of subtle, but like he's clearly trying to find a way to keep John alive and not get him killed. Oh, you know, that was there's a great scene where what was it? He said, gosh, it was after they thought they killed him. And
he's talking to Brian Dennehy.
Yeah, he's talking to Brian Dennehy.
They blew up the cave that he retreated into, and they thought he was dead.
He's talking, and the guy's saying about, you know, he's just another drifter who broke the law. And Colonel Chapman goes, vagrancy, wasn't it? That's going to look real good on his tombstone at Arlington. Here lies John Rambo, winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor, survivor of countless incursions behind enemy lines, killed for vagrancy in Jerkwater, USA.
Yeah, that was a great line. Yeah, I remember that scene.
The other line was where he goes, well, you can't send your people in there; they're going to get killed. I know that we're not all heroes, but we're all trying to do our jobs, just like you and the special forces. Well, in special forces, we teach our people to stay alive in the line of duty. He goes, you send your people in there, you forgot one thing. What's that? A good supply of body bags.
Yeah, there were a lot of good quips. You know, when he was kind of putting Brian Dennehy in his place about, you know.
Oh, the best one was where he goes, I don't think he goes, I come to get my boy, and they go, I don't think you understand. I don't know why this is your problem. Rambo's a civilian now. And he goes, I don't think you understand. I didn't come here to rescue him from you. I came to rescue you from him. Yeah, I remember that.
And Brian Dennehy didn't take to that very well. Yeah.
No.
And for those who haven't seen this movie, and there might be some, because that movie is going back, was it like 1981 or something?
Gosh, I can't believe that's where I'm like getting kind of sad. I was just reading about Red Dawn, came out in '84, a couple years after that, and just like thinking about how old some of these films are that I grew up on, where I wasn't around when they came out, but they were just like right after or right before I was born. And so I'm looking at I just realized this year is going to mark 20th anniversary of Lord of the Rings coming out.
Oh my God, Jesus!
I know.
So TJ, why is it whenever I speak to you, I feel even older than I am? I'm gonna have to stop inviting you on, because you know. But I tell you what, we're gonna come back to this theme. But I said I wasn't. By the way, for those listening, TJ had no warning about what I was going to talk about in this. So a question I'm going to ask him, because everybody knows TJ knows he's a writer, and he's a journalist, and a motorcycle enthusiast, and a mountain man, and he's great with an axe. But one of the things I want to ask you is, people who like to read, like myself, especially fiction, I think most people like myself, we have how do I say this? A kind of envy for writers. Maybe it's the way, I'm guessing, I'm not someone who very much appreciates paintings per se. I mean, I can somewhat, look at a Rembrandt or a Van Gogh and say, yes, it's brilliant or whatever. But I mean, I do really love to read. And I've never been able to write a novel. I always wanted to. And you have written several, and I've read them. And my question is this. I've asked this to just about every author I've ever had on the show. And take your time in answering this. Do you believe that writers are born, or are they made?
I think that, for me, I think what I had that made me, that allowed me to become a writer, was that I had the capacity for the imagination necessary to be a writer. I did not have the writing abilities, I can tell you that, judging by my earliest works. I really did not know how to write. I didn't know how to, it took a lot of practice. But what I had was the ability to just think about stuff and the willingness to explore it. And so I would say I don't think that writers are necessarily born, and it also depends on what type of writer. I mean, there's some writers I know who are very good at writing nonfiction, but they don't know how to write fiction. And then there's guys.
Oh yeah, no, I could tell that. Yeah, because I've seen people who try to do the crossover and it doesn't work. Yeah. And vice versa too. Sometimes people who write I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but some people who have a history of writing fiction, they would try to take on a project of doing a biography of somebody, and it's like basically you're just making this shit up. You're like leaving all the facts out. They forgot they have to reference things and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't. For example, there was that one gal who wrote the book about. And why am I blanking on his name? Louis Zamperini. He was the World War II vet in the Pacific.
Unbreakable.
Yeah, I don't think I could write a book like that. It's because it's not just nonfiction; it's literary nonfiction. It's very, she's telling a story, but she's doing it in a way that I probably couldn't. That's not how my brain is wired. She was probably willing. I think the problem I would have had is that I would have written it much more drier and more matter of fact than, I don't know. But I also I got to interview, I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but I actually, there was I might have, I run out of, I keep forgetting who I've told these stories to, but there was this, I was this reporter over on the West Side years ago for this newspaper. And I got a call from a retiree senior living center right around November 11th. And they're like, "Oh, you plan to do any stories for Veterans Day?" And I said, "Oh, nothing really, like just, we're doing whatever we could do." And he says, "Well, I've got this guy who was the first guy to have his landing craft at Omaha Beach on D-Day. Do you want to interview him?" I was like,
"Holy fuck."
Yeah. I was like, yeah. I was like, literally, I grabbed my notepad and I said, like, let's talk to him right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm talking to him, and I wrote a 2-part story on his experiences. And one of the problems is that he was old and he was very, they're not mentally all there. So like things are just scatterbrained everywhere. So you got to put all this stuff together. The cool thing was, I was given copies of the illustrations that he drew during the war because he was kind of a comic guy. He did little comics or illustrations when he was in the Army, and he drew illustrations of his wartime experiences. So all these different times where he was, coming out of the beach, or when he was going up the cliffs, or when his tank destroyer blew up and he saw a guy, crawling with half his body gone. Yeah, he was on the Siegfried line. He was in occupied Germany. He saw all sorts of crazy stuff there that I couldn't put into the newspaper. I was like,
right.
Yeah, politically incorrect. We can't talk about that. Yeah. And so, but yeah, it was. I think that was an example of where like I was feeling comfortable doing that. But I'd say also, man, one of the things with being a writer is it's kind of a curse in a way, because you're having an imagination allows you to see things as how they could be. Whereas if you're more of a mechanical engineering type, you see the world as it is, and you probably don't spend as much time thinking about, like, you don't have the imagination to think about how things could be. So that's one of the problems that I have, is like, I know how different things could be. And I think maybe you've made comments about this as well on some historical events like 9/11, where things could have been different. Like we could have gone a totally different direction than where we went. And so I think that kind of what pains me is like, I just think about how different, like I have the imagination to create a fictional like where would America be today if we took a different historical route on a couple of different major events, or societally and culturally, like where would we be today? And the thing is, it didn't have to be this way. But at the same time, people will, I've had people tell me, like, you can't dwell on the hypotheticals or what didn't happen.
Yeah, but it's easy for someone to say that. But if that's the way your brain is wired, and I sincerely believe that some people's brains are wired like kind of like what you're saying, being a writer, specifically a writer of fiction. I mean, you're a journalist as well. I mean, you write. I put the link to the lens in the description for people who want to follow your journalistic work, and also the link to your tjmartinell.com, so they can, all your stuff is there, but having that, that's interesting that you said that, because it is in some ways a curse. Like, there's like a cliche about great writers kind of indulging in self-destructive behavior like writer, like drinking was, like Hemingway and what is your thoughts on that? Like,
I totally understand why writers drink. Like, especially, I mean, dude, this is also where it gets a little depressing. Like journalists, a journalist from 6 years ago would have, I need to be careful with what I say, but they would have given an ass whooping to journalists today. I mean, I knew an old school reporter who was like in his 60s or 70s, and he was telling me, first of all, he had no filter. This guy had no, like, journalists from the back in the day were like the most.
Well, they had balls back in those days.
Yeah, they had balls, but they also just had no filter. I mean, they would say things that, like, I had a pretty thick skin, so it's like I didn't take it to heart, but I was like, and our HR lady, when she was visiting, she would just stop up her ears, like, I'm not hearing this, and she would walk by his desk whenever he was talking, because the stuff he said about anyways. But
be careful.
Yeah, I gotta.
I'm not monetized, so don't worry. But anyway,
well, there was this one time this guy got stuck in a one of the newsrooms. This was decades ago. He was a young reporter, and he got stuck in the newsroom. I think there was like some sort of a snowstorm or a natural disaster, but he basically couldn't leave. He had to stay there the night. So he's getting a little hungry. So he's going around the different reporters' desks to kind of try and find some snacks or food. And he said, I could have started a bar with what I found.
Oh yeah, like the old days, everybody had a fifth of whatever it was. Rum.
He said, I've never seen so much whiskey in my life. He goes, it was just whiskey and whiskey everywhere. And so, yeah, reporters were drinkers too. And writers always had that.
So the writers, so it's kind of like you're saying that, like, even the journalists, not just the fiction writers, there is something about this. Is that just to keep you from completely losing your shit, or like,
it's like it's. I think it's an how can I put it? It's like the curse of knowledge, like, and maybe not for reporters.
It's kind of like the Greek myth of Cassandra.
Yeah, dude, I totally understand, like, the Cassandra curse. Like,
yeah,
you see things and
you're helpless to change it. Yeah,
right. Kind of reminds me of what was that line from Gettysburg? It was the Union guy. He was like at the beginning. He's like, it's like I can see the troops going up the stony slopes and knowing it'll fail, but you can't prevent it. And of course he does.
Yeah, but actually you have to help it fail. Yeah, you're talking about General Buford.
Yeah, General Buford.
Yeah, he was in charge of. Yeah, he was a general of the Union cavalry. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think with writers, I think a part of it is like they tap into a good writer can tap into they experience human emotions, or they're able to tap into it that a lot of people may not experience unless they've actually gone through an experience. So a good writer can vicariously experience the emotions of somebody who's been at war, has PTSD, has seen his buddy die. Like they can, I don't know how you describe it, but their imagination's so strong.
No, that's it's kind of an advanced form of empathy, not sympathy. Empathy.
Yeah. It's like you, for certain types of writers, they're able to sit there and think, like, a lot of people don't do this, but they will sit there when especially if they're working on a story, and say, what would it be like to be in a combat zone and to see your best friend die? Like, what would that do? And they can, like, create a totally imaginary world of what that's like and experience those emotions. And so that's the problem, is like, when you experience them as a writer, you may not necessarily get, like, how do you deal with that? Because you didn't go through it, so you can't say I went through it, but you did experience them on some level. And so you have it. And I'm not saying like every writer does this. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of literature today is not very good, is because, I mean, I see people pushing Dostoevsky, who wrote a whole bunch of great. The other thing that I was going to say, and I didn't say this on Twitter, but I was going to say it. A lot of great writers are actually not the greatest human beings in the world. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that. But Dostoevsky, like, for example, a lot of people are touting him as like his books on Christianity. And I've read about Dostoevsky as a person, and I can't remember who
I think
it
you're
was.
mispronouncing his name, Dostoevsky, but
Yeah. Somebody,
the famous Russian novelist. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, he wrote Crime and Punishment. He wrote Demons. He wrote the Idiot. He wrote the Brothers Karamazov, which I went halfway through, and it was very difficult to go through because
Crime and Punishment is probably what people, because you had to read that in college. But anyway,
yeah, I can't remember who it was, but one Russian, I think, described him as the most evil Christian he had ever met. Like, he was just not a good person. And I think part of it was like he just had this wide range. I mean, the guy had lived a very interesting life. His father was a horrible man who was murdered by his peasant serfs. Dostoevsky, the famous Russian writer, got involved in like a socialist group and got sent to Siberia, and they literally dragged them out to be executed, had the guns raised, and then they were spared at the last minute by the Tsar. And according to what I read, one of the guys next to him like went mad after that. Like, he just went mentally insane.
He broke.
Yeah, he broke. Like, it was just beyond what he could take. So he had that, but like, he had a lot of like, he had mental problems, he had psychological problems, he had epilepsy, he had a gambling addiction. I mean, there was a woman in his life, I can't remember her name. She was like years younger than him when they got married, but she dictated all. So people don't know this about him. Most of his novels were not written by him. He dictated them to his secretary. Then she eventually married her, but his wife, and I
never heard that.
Yeah, she dictated all of his novels, and literally as soon as they were written, with no editing, they tossed him to the publishers because he was always writing under the gun. It was kind of like Hunter S. Thompson, where he would send his stuff in at the last minute so they wouldn't edit it. his gonzo journalism.
Yeah, well, a lot of his stuff you could kind of tell it wasn't edited, but anyway.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about that was his books really needed some revisions or editing, and I think that's where they really suffered. But he explored a lot of stuff that I think it's like normal people don't look at that, if that makes sense. Like, normal people don't really think about that stuff. I think that's where writers drink, is because they think about stuff that ordinary people don't. And it's like, it's almost like you need ordinary people for the most part, but you also need people who are a little weird to think about that stuff.
Yeah, like I don't think society could function if everybody if the majority of people in society had, no offense, TJ, but if the majority of people in society had brains like writers, I think it would be destructive. Maybe you disagree. I don't know.
Well, I think that I'm trying
to think. There'd be consequences.
Well, I mean, one of the things that so I'm a writer. My gift is with the digital pen, so to speak. I really am not very good at a lot of crafts, like craftsman type things. I'm not the greatest with my hands. I'm trying to work on that and improve that, and like change, really change my mental, my brain's way of thinking on stuff.
Well, can I ask you this? So I'm curious about, can you paint, draw, that kind of stuff, or play music?
I actually played the clarinet when I was in high school. I was pretty good.
Okay. No, I was just wondering if that's a constant, like, people who are creative sometimes, like, for example, like, there was one of my best friends. He was dumb as bricks, but he could draw. I mean, no, a great guy. I mean, I don't mean dumb, like he was dumb in school. Like he wasn't stupid, like street smart. He was a tough kid, actually. But anyway, but this is back in New York. But he could draw, and I remember, like, I think it was in 5th grade when we used to read comic books, and I remember him drawing Spider-Man just freehand, like from memory. And I was like, "How do you do that?" And he's like, "I don't know, I just do it." I was like, "But I mean, he could just do it." You know what I mean? Like, and I was just wondering if that's because that had to be genetic, right? No one taught him. He just could do it. He saw it and he could just repeat it.
Yeah, I think that, one thing I've really noticed is that a lot of guys who are very good with car, like for example, notice a lot of like guys who are just they didn't go to they didn't graduate. I know some guys who didn't graduate from high school or they didn't go to college, but man, they know how to work on cars. They know.
Yeah, one of my best friends literally builds cars for fun. And I'm not talking like just like does the frame of the car. I mean, actually building the actual engine block, like putting piston rings in, balancing the piston. I don't know how much you know about how, old cars work, balancing all that. I mean, does all that like from scratch. And this guy was actually, he told me, he shared this with me years later that he was actually, when he was in school, he was on the short bus.
Yeah, this is where I think that our concept of intelligence, I think, is not. I don't think it's good. I think that we break our intelligence down by, how well do you know this and how well do you know that? You know what? This is where hierarchy as a society, or not hierarchy, but just like, gosh, we're running out of words that we can use. But I use this word. I use this word in a politically neutral sense. There needs to be kind of a segregation of intelligence. If you know how to build a car from scratch, you are intelligent in that area. If you know how to code, you are intelligent in that area. If you know how to write a good novel or do really well at some sort of art, you're really intelligent in that area. But let's not try to like fetishize one time, when the whole learn to code thing. It's like, we can't all be coders. Like that's not how our society works. And so this is where we talk about like all the different technological innovations that have occurred. Certain types of people's intelligence levels have been rendered they've been deprived of their value as a result. I mean, there's guys who are really,
demeaned, almost like belittled, demeaned.
There's been a total attack. Yeah, there's been a total attack. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, there was really a huge stigma against the trades. Like every kid was being told to go just get a worthless degree. And, their parents wouldn't make a fuss when they ended up working at Starbucks. But if that kid had said, I want to go be a plumber or go be an electrician, they'd have basically committed Harry Carey. Like they would have, and like, I remember years ago when I was living on the West Side, I would drive by these places in kind of a blue collar area, and they would literally have like handwritten signs that would say, looking for electrician entry level, $50 per hour starting. Like, wow.
Man, like 100K, man.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, why would you tell because it's all about perception, and the perception at the time of these boomer parents was that, the future is in college. I remember, when I was in college, I had a whole bunch of boomers telling me, oh, you can get this degree, and then if you don't like working in that field or it doesn't pan out, you can always get a job at Microsoft or one of the tech companies. Because in the 80s, they were just hiring anybody that they could who knew how to do, like, for example, if you knew how to do writing but you didn't do coding, they would put you to work writing their technical the manuals.
Oh, writing the manuals. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's completely changed since then. So all the information that they gave me was outdated. And so this is where I'm not entirely sympathetic wholly with kids who took out student loans. I'd have to do on a case-by-case basis. What I really got a problem with is where the older generation gives them a hard time for that. Because I promise you, they didn't do that on their own. Somebody was pushing them off that cliff. And it was probably
they were 18. It's kind of like what we were just joking about before.
That's another, exactly. 18 years old. It's like, I got to put that in the book where they say, well, in older societies, you could take out $150,000 in student loans at age 18, but you couldn't have a beer. We can't trust you with a beer. Yeah.
That's good. All right. Yeah. All right. So that's we're gonna see that in some form in one of TJ's next works.
No, we totally, like, if I was the strongman authoritarian leader of America, that'd be like the first thing on my list is just banning student loans to anyone under the age of like 25, saying, nope, can't take out a student loan until you're 25. And then people say, oh, they could do that. That's their choice. It's like, really? Is it their choice to drink? Is it their choice to smoke? Is it their choice to have a gun or a pistol? Is it their choice to rent a car? You know, like you're very very selective about their right to choose. You know, they can go join the military and kill for the U.S. government. They can abort their own child. They can get married. But all this, like, this is just the total, I'd say, like psychological irrationality of the modern American psyche. And why they picked 21 is the age that you know, drinking. Whereas this is what's so funny is I was reading about the Pilgrims when they were coming over in the Mayflower. Like everybody drank beer because the water was so
actually
unsanitary.
it's in the logbook about that, right? They were
that's
running low on beer.
Yeah, that's why they stopped at Plymouth, at the area that became Plymouth, as they ran out of beer. They're like, we're getting out of here. We're getting out. Where's the beer? We're out of booze.
We got no beer. All right, we got to find land soon. Yeah, all right. But it's like Clown World now, right? I mean, the idea of prepubescent children making decisions about taking puberty blockers, you know, using drugs that were originally designed to prevent, like, there's a condition called precocious adolescence. Like that's what these drugs were originally designed for. You know, that's when kids hit puberty too early. They give them that drug because it can lead to brittle bone disease and all sorts of things like that. And actually now they're using those drugs to, anyway, I mean, I don't want to go off on that because you and I we're kind of on the same wavelength there, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But it's just you know, it's Clown World. I just don't know what else to call it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy about how what our society considers normal compared to other ones. I was reading about, you know, I was reading about that book on William Marshall and kind of what was considered normal, at least for his class, because class was much more important in his day than they are for ours. The rules of like what was normal and expected. You know, I think that this is one of the problems when people talk about prior eras. It's like, well, what class of people are you talking about? Because if you're talking about a pet, you know, some people will say, oh, monogamy wasn't really, you know, everybody was cheating on their wives back then. It's like, yeah, if they were the aristocracy in the Middle Ages, I can understand that. But, you know, the peasants, no, like which composed like 99% of Europe. It's like, no, they're not running around, you know, cheating on their wives because
they were just they were working 18 hours a day, for fuck's sake. Yeah.
Well, that was the other crazy. They were working hard, but well, here's the crazy part: is I was reading this book, this very practical book on the Middle Ages. Like he got down into like, what did they eat? What was life actually like for these people? And he said the average peasant in medieval Europe worked fewer days of the year than Westerners do today. They had more days off. Because of holidays and feasts and all that kind of stuff. The difference is they probably just worked harder. Well,
I think also that was because they it depended on the time of year because it was agrarian. Right. So
you can't work in the winter.
Right. So there was a huge amount of downtime, but when they had when they were planting, they were working a long time, and then when they were harvesting, they were working a long time. But then there was this down period. Yeah.
Right. I just thought that was funny. Is like these people they are living off the land. They're not like, it's not like us where we take 2 weeks off and it's like the food is not going to disappear from our houses and all that kind of stuff. Like I think most people could probably not work a whole lot, but you know, one of the other interesting things is that for the average peasant, marriage was actually the average age of their marriages was actually relatively, I don't want to say it's anywhere near what it was today, but it wasn't like incredibly young. Like for the woman, it was like in her early 20s, and for the guy, it was like 26 or something like that. For the aristocracy, it was very different. I mean, William Marshall married at age 40. He married a 16-year-old, but she was also like the heiress of some massive estates. Like he essentially became a millionaire through her. So, you know, this is where through the marriage. It's like, guys, you gotta like, you can't compare. This is like talking about the life of Jeff Bezos and saying, "Oh, this represents average America and Appalachia." It's like, yeah, no, no, it doesn't. It's like, no, guys, like you can talk like, yeah. This is where I get a little. This is where people have to really be specific about like, who they're talking about. And I understand that in America today, there's not nearly as much of a class distinction in some ways. In some ways, the aristocracy, for example, back then was much more dignified in how they dressed compared to now. They dress like Bill Gates dresses like he dresses like some sort of like overweight soccer mom.
Yeah, he's a bit of a freak. I'm not sure what to make of him lately because some of his interviews, he's kind of really scaring me. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, just put what's that joke? You just give him an eye patch and a Persian cat, and he's a fucking James Bond villain.
You know, this is what I find so amazing is like why, like he kind of, you know what I say? It reminds me of that line from Braveheart where Edward Longshanks says, "Who is this person who speaks as though I wish to hear what he has to say?" Like, why are you talking? You couldn't keep viruses out of your software. Now you're going to lecture. You're going to talk to us about getting viruses.
I'm stealing that line.
I mean, it's just like, why are you talking?
Yeah, who are you? Like, why we? Do you have a medical degree? Do you have a PhD in epidemiology? Why are you telling me about the fucking virus? Yeah.
Well, like, why are we listening to these? I mean, we can all kind of just see it for what's going on. It's people who have so much money, and this is what I find so interesting is people talk about. You want to talk about a millionaire's tax. It's like, how would they just tax or confiscate the wealth? You know what they'll never talk about? They'll never talk about confiscating the wealth of Bezos and Bill Gates and any of these other like big guys where you just say, yeah, we're going to take, half your holdings. You have too much money, right? You can literally bankrupt or you can literally dictate the politics of an entire state. Bill Gates now owns more farmland than anyone else. Like,
yeah, I read that.
And people, I understand people from like a libertarian perspective would say, well, if he bought it legitimately, and my response to that would be, great. We don't live in Ancapidice. We live in a society where he also can buy politicians to regulate how that land is used. He can also cause the value of that land through government regulations to suddenly become more valuable than it is.
Mm-hmm. And other people's land to become less valuable.
Yes. And so this is where I get really tired of people say, like, it's almost like I say, I try to give the comparison. It's like, it's like Hydra. Hydra isn't an organization. It's a ideology, and it's in the private sector as much as it's in the public sector or in the nonprofit sector. It's Hydra. Right? You're not fighting. It's not the public sector versus the private sector. It's Hydra versus like freedom fighters or patriots or Americans or whatever comparison we want to use. But, he's Hydra. It doesn't matter if he's in the private sector. It doesn't matter if he's working for the government. Like, what I see is like somebody who's working for the government, like they worked for the EPA or they're working for the FDA or the FAA or whatever. And then they go work in the private sector. You don't think that there's any kind of like political incest going on?
Oh yeah, of course. And even in the military, like these generals, right? So they get a job, they become 3-4 star generals, and then they retire, and then they go work for defense contractors, or lobbyist firms. So it's the same thing. I mean, that's you see the military, all the generals are gunning for war right now in Syria. That's the new thing, and I'm sure in the next sometimes this administration, we're going to bomb more brown people,
Yeah. And that's where I think that for people who are trying to understand, it's not so much like, it's not a question of like what right and wrong. It's a question of like accurately perceiving what's going on. Bill Gates is not a government official, but he controls politics and he has more power over government than a lot of politicians. So this is where I'm not saying that the government should be doing stuff, but it's like it should at least be disconcerting for people.
I think for a lot of people, for you and me, and I think a lot of people still, I mean, the dwindling numbers, but still, I think a lot of people are concerned about this. Also, it's the idea that when you reach that level of wealth, I mean, all these things come with wealth, including influence and whatever. You influence the way people think. You can control that. And that is a real danger. That's one of the reasons. One of the reasons why I don't really like the concept of democracy, because I always said democracy is two lions and a lamb deciding who are they gonna eat for dinner. I mean, that's basically what that's technically democracy, right? But
I mean, this is something that people really don't contextualize with like, for example, Athens was a democracy. What they don't tell you is that 5% of the population got to vote. You had to be a free man who owned property. Great. You eliminated 95% of the population from that rule. And so like, and maybe I'm not being totally like the percentages we can argue over, but like the vast majority, I would say 90% of the people in Athens did not get to vote. So when we talk about democracy, people say, what do you think of democracy? Or, oh, we're a democracy or whatever. And it's like, we should not be having every half-wit should not be able to vote. Like the idea that you could just walk into a jurisdiction and suddenly wield political power through the ballot box is nonsense. This is something that's at some point is going to change through the ballot box or through the bullet box. Like it's going to change some way where states are going to basically just be like, we're either going to pass residency laws that make it impossible for you to just show up tomorrow and vote. I mean, think about what will happen when they realize they can just dump 100,000 homeless people in a state and do same-day registration like they do in Washington State. I mean, you could basically invade a state for a day. They get to register to vote that day. They get to vote, and then they go back the next day. The expense of moving those people around is far cheaper than a campaign. You can influence it, true. But at that point, you're forcing people to say, well, what are you going to do? I mean, the next move is basically, this is where ultimately in America, I think we're going to see borders at some point. I don't know when. It could be 10, 20 years from now. It could be 5 years from now. It could be tomorrow. We're going to see states really starting to restrict borders, like border entry, where you're coming in from another state and it's like, why are you here? What are you doing here? Like, what is your purpose in our state? Because that's a luxury in a free state where people are not abusing the system. But when people are coming into your state, it's kind of like if people were to show up in my community and they were to move here, like if a couple were to come here and they say, I'm from Seattle, I'd be like, why are you here? Like, why? Yeah. No. Seriously. Like, well, we didn't like it there. It's like, well, did you vote for it there? Like, how did you vote? Yes. And if their arguments like, saying, oh, well, we voted for them, but we don't like what they did. It's like, yes, just for the record, I don't want you here.
Right.
I don't want to associate with you. Like social ostracization is going to end up being a thing where, and I think that that's probably the case, in some southern states where you don't just get to, as a buddy of mine said, he goes, you don't just get to show up and start telling the folks there what to do. They're like, yeah, hold on there now. Like, we've been doing this the way we've been doing it for a while, and it hasn't been a problem. Like, you're not going to just come changing things just because you showed up, you're Janie and Johnny come lately or whatever. But because we're still kind of a pioneer state in the Pacific Northwest, it's acceptable to just show up, not only from another state, but from another freaking country and be like, oh, we got to make all these changes. It's like, well, hold on here. Who are you? Who died and made you the Pope? And we're not Catholics here, by the way.
Well, no, that's one of the things. Like, I'm a little bit more pessimistic about that. I believe that, the Democrats will shove, they'll accept all these third world refugees from whatever part of the third world, and they will dump them into places like Cascadia, in Washington State and stuff like that, and just totally turn the demographics. And, legally they can do that because who's going to stop them? And then if you do anything about it, they'll call you a racist or, or this or that or whatever. And the people will cower simply because they have more to lose. Because, pushing back, because there's a law of immediacy, right? Like people think about, people are not thinking about the long-term threat. It's human nature to think about the short-term threat. So in the short term, going up against this could mean imprisonment, death, losing my home.
And that works in some parts of Washington State. And I'm not trying to be overly optimistic or like overly whatever, but I just know that certain parts of Eastern Washington, there's enough poverty to where people just are like, you can manipulate people who have money and you can tug at their hearts. You can't tug at the hearts of people who, like, you're basically trying to squeeze blood from a stone, where they're just struggling to survive and say, oh, well, you don't care about the poor. It's like, bitch, I am poor, like I'm struggling here. Like there's some people who just will not tolerate that. And maybe not right now, but if it ever got into a serious situation in like economically, you don't want to be a person causing problems in certain areas.
No, I agree. And that's one of the reasons I love, Central and Eastern Washington, is because they still do have that spirit. And they are like the, they are kind of like what you think of when rural America, the quote unquote flyover country, that still exists in parts of the Pacific Northwest, not in Seattle or 90% of Western Washington, but the rest of the state, yeah, it still exists. I mean, that's why, Washington State, more so than probably any other state, there's this huge dichotomy where, I mean, if any state should be split in two, it's Washington.
Right. I mean, I talked to guys who worked for the federal government, and they said that there's certain parts of Washington State and Oregon that they just consider to be not like the Chaz, where it's like dysfunctional, POS nonsense, but like legitimately areas that are what do I call it?
Anarcho-capitalist
they are anarchy communities where essentially the people there take care of themselves, and you don't mess around with their autonomy. Like I was talking to one federal agent, he was dealing with wildfire policy stuff, and he said that there was times where he said it was like the Wild West. He would show up with a bunch of guys and they're like trying to deal with these wildfires. And the problem is like, okay, but wildfire starts on one jurisdiction. Fires don't understand jurisdictions. They'll go from one jurisdiction to another. So like these feds would go onto private land to prevent a wildfire from spreading, right? And so there's disputes over like who's going to take care of the land. And he said like there was a couple of like OK Corral style standoffs with these ranchers and these guys in rural Oregon. I mean, after talking to him, I kind of understood like the whole Bundy ranch kind of standoff thing. Like some of these guys are like, you don't like, these are the guys who they will go all the way with you if you push them.
Yeah, that's the hill they will die on. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the interesting thing about some of these people is like the government has figured out these people will go all the way. Don't mess with them because we're not gonna win because for whatever reason I think that they almost understand the psyche of who they're dealing with. Like if it's a guy who like genuinely has nothing to lose or it's like they're willing to lose it all, they're gonna leave him alone. Because no plea bargain is going to work. They'll go all the way to a jury trial, and the jury's going to look at them, and they're going to look at the feds, and they're going to say, "Yeah, we're acquitting." Even if they broke the law, we're gonna nullify the federal laws. And so that's the interesting thing about certain parts of Eastern Washington is that is the case with them, and so they have to work with these people. And so I think that it's like if you live in an urban area, a suburban area. Yeah, you're probably going to have a problem with them settling. They're not going to do that in certain rural areas because, hell, I wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't want to be around those people. Some of these people, like some of them, like this is kind of the downside to like some of these people is like their lifestyles allow them to live free, but it's because they're so extreme in how they deal with the government. Government doesn't want to deal with them because they don't care. Whereas the government likes dealing with rational people, or at least people who are reasonable. That's like, because here's the thing: whoever's the most reasonable in a fight or a conflict will lose. It's always the most irrational person in a conflict who will win because they don't care. They don't care if they kill you both or you both die. They don't care. They're willing to go all the way. But if you deal with somebody who would rather live than win or take you both down, then they know they got you. And that's kind of the
Well, I look at it this way, like whoever has the most to lose, like you think about a federal agent, he's going to say, well, I want to go home to my wife and kids. Right. And, I'm just getting paid to do this, where you could say this rural person that's like, live free or die. He's like, well, I'm willing to go out. Are you, I'm willing to die for this. A federal agent's like, look, this is just my job. I'm not willing to die.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's funny. I have a friend of mine that's still in the military. He's just getting out. He's a senior officer in the military. And I was talking, I tease him because there's all this stuff in the military now where they have all the transgenders and all that kind of stuff. And I said, yeah. Can you imagine us having going to war with China or Russia where they don't really, they're not worried about, having they're having like Trump got rid of it. Now Biden just brought it back, like privilege training.
They've basically allowed pregnant women to be deployed in, I can't remember what it was, but it's like they had pregnant women
in areas, and
And I'm just thinking like, okay, I think it was last year. I was actually thinking about, I kind of just had this desire because I was just at the age where I had to make a decision about whether I want to do it. I was thinking about joining some sort of Green Beret Special Forces type thing. And it was the stuff like that I was reading. And that was during Trump's presidency, where I was like, you know what? My values are not represented in the military. And I understood that, like, on some level, was like, just like I was reading some of the stuff. It's like, these people are just like, they're not, whatever I want to be is not going to be in the military anymore. And that's just kind of sad. Like if I wanted to like push myself, they're not going to be there. All I'm going to be is an enabler of dysfunctional behavior. That's it.
That's sad, because that was military. You'd think would be the one place left where you could, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you've been following the stuff that's been going on Twitter and with Tucker Carlson, but he called out the military and they went after him on stuff. And it's like, you guys are, they're talking about, oh, diversity is our strength. It's like, really? Go take it into a fight, dumbass. Like,
yeah, well, diversity when it comes to, it's interesting. It's funny you just said that. I was watching a video that someone had made about, it was World War II in Germany. They were comparing, why was it that Germany in World War II, percentage-wide suffered, way more losses than they did in World War I, but the military never collapsed. And the video is on, it's kind of on the science of cohesion. Won't get into all the details, but there's what they call vertical cohesion, lateral cohesion, the whole bit, But one of the things that the Germans did, at least up until the very, up until I'd say the end of 1944, they kept people, like if you were from the same town, they were all kind of kept together, like those units. So there wasn't any diversity. So one of the things about cohesion, like they all spoke, let's say, the same dialect or accent they all spoke German, but you know what I mean? Like, and that helped. So there was always this sense of kinship. Once you put diversity in the mix, people realize, especially when you start to be on the losing side of things, what am I fighting for? I have nothing in common with the guys, lying next to me in the foxhole,
Right.
So so diversity is the last thing you want in military.
Well, it's like, that's what dumbass says diversity is our strength. It's like, great, I'm fighting alongside somebody who I don't. This is one of the problems with the Crusades when they were fighting, and we did a live stream about this a while ago. Is that A lot of them didn't speak, like they didn't speak the same language. They would, like, you had Germans and the French and the Normans and the English like fighting together. You had to coordinate with different languages. It was the same problem with the Persians I think it was that one naval battle they were fighting against the Greeks. They were from so many different nations. They didn't know how to speak. They didn't know how to speak to each other.
Oh, was that Themistocles when Themistocles defeated the Persians?
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to look up the name of the battle. It was a naval battle. Not Sardinia. It was the one I think before or after the Battle of Thermopylae. But
yeah, that was Themistocles was the Athenian Athenian admiral, for lack of a better word, that defeated the
yes, but the Battle of Salamis. Yeah, that was it. And so what happened is Xerxes put his like infantry on the ships because he didn't trust his own people, because a lot of them were slaves. Well, and they were from different nations that may not have loyalty to them. Well, the problem is they crowded the boats so much that they couldn't maneuver on the boats in an accurate way, or in a good way. Yeah, communication is huge. This is the thing that just, like within firefighting and within the military, communication is vital. If you don't communicate properly and accurately, you got problems. And so that's why it's like anybody who doesn't know how to communicate well does not belong in a combat situation. Period. Like this is and the idea, they say diversity of what, man? Like diversity of like battlefield abilities. Great. Somebody who knows how to work the radio, somebody who knows how to work the mortar, somebody who's good with the machine guns, somebody who's good with tactics and strategy, somebody who knows how to read a map and work the compass and all that kind of stuff and doesn't rely. Great. What diversity are we talking about here? And let's be a little bit more poignant or pointed. The revolution that we fought and beat the English was primarily not only just Anglo-Saxons primarily, but they were also from a distinct denomination. They were mostly Presbyterians. Mm-hmm. So don't tell me that diversity is, when you say our strength, it's like, what do you mean we? What do you mean our?
Yeah, well, then who's the we? Right, yeah.
No, like it reminds me of that old Lone Ranger joke. What do you mean we, white man?
Yeah. Well, actually, tell the whole story. That's when the Lone Ranger and Tonto are being surrounded by Indians, and he says, "Oh, it looks like we're in trouble, Kimosabe." He goes, "What do you mean we?"
Yeah, white man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's like, what do you mean we? Like, who is we? Who, when you say diversity is our strength, are you talking about the Marine Corps? Like, who are you talking about here? And I can only imagine, like, man, imagine being a Marine right now and thinking and having like how demoralizing it is to have these idiots say, oh, pregnant women are totally like badass on the battlefield or something like that. And just being humiliated by the stupidity of your commanders.
Well, yeah, I mean, they also like Tucker Carlson. I think he showed the video of the pregnant flight suit. Like, what are they going to have? Like a chick who's like 6 months pregnant and she's like, she goes into labor early while she's piloting like an F-35. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, that's insanity,
I mean, the thing is, it's only this is why I would I would tell people not to be in the military. They're only going to fix these problems after a ton of Americans, I want to say Americans, I would say people who are members of the United States military are killed in some major military disaster with either China or Russia or God knows what other country they get into a war with, like Iran. They go to invade Iran and Iran just completely wipes the table with these guys.
Right.
And then they're like, well, I mean, the only thing is like here's where I get kind of cynical, just like you on this stuff. A lot of these people are so stubborn and stupid and arrogant. Their only way of being brought to reality is death. The only way they'll accept reality is being killed. They won't. But these are the people in leadership who have no fear, who have no danger of being killed in battle. They'd have to be forcibly removed by some commander who says, "I'm not going to sacrifice any more of my boys in this fight just to satisfy your ideological purity."
Well, that's one of the reasons I always believe that the left always wins, is because the left would rather burn something to the ground than lose it, where people on the right would rather surrender it in this, vain hope they could get it back one day. So that's why I think the left always wins. And let's be honest, they have been, they always do. So because they always will literally say, well, I'll burn, if I can't control it, I'll destroy it. If I can't have it, no one will. And the right doesn't work that way.
No, and I'd say the older right doesn't work that way. Maybe the younger right doesn't. I mean, the problem, the thing is, the older right, they all got married, had kids, they've owned property. They're gonna, if everything just keeps going the way it is, they'll die in peace. The younger right doesn't have any of that stuff, so it's like, what do they have left to lose? I mean,
well, they don't. But the thing about the young is the right on the young they're a minority. I mean, the young is overwhelmingly left.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where it's like, oh God, some of the stuff that I hear from young people is, I'd say that, it depends on what part of the country they're from. And I'd say that, not necessarily from our area, but yeah, I think that it's going to lead to a very interesting situation where people are going to just say, like, what do I have to lose? But man, it doesn't take a lot of people to shape or change things where, I mean, I don't know. This is where I don't know what the future is going to look like, because I mean, nobody thought in 1985 that the Soviet Union only had 6 years left. So
very true, because I can actually remember 1985. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So the United States of America may not have as long, or maybe it may change what it is. But I think it's like things could go on for a very long time, or it could end very quickly. And that's kind of what for me is what kind of drives me crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, one of the expressions, I don't know if Aaron Cleary coined it, but I'm in an age right now where I'm like, look, I just need them to keep the lights on for another 25 years and I don't give a fuck. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what the problem is? I mean, that's one of Aaron's sayings. It's like, but I look at what's going on. It's like, man, they're going to basically put people in charge of our electrical grid who think that having electricity is racist. I mean, I'm deadly serious. They're going to
I'm laughing because the stuff that we used to joke about, like that would never happen, and then it has, right? Like you never thought that 5-year-olds could decide, a 5-year-old boy could decide he wants to be a girl, and then Biden come out and all for it. So yeah, that could be very true. That could happen, and it could happen very quickly. I don't know. But yeah, you are absolutely right. So I guess you're right, because like that time frame, God, a quarter century, my God, look what's happened in the last quarter century. I mean, look how much things have changed from like 1996 till now,
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, I remember when gay marriage was illegal in Washington State.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't allowed. So I think that, I mean, we're going to get to a point that having sanitation, having clean water, having hot water, having running water is going to be considered racist. Like we're going to get to that point where it's like these people are going to push, these mentally ill lunatics are going to push things as far as they can to see what they can get. And my question is, at what point, how far are most people willing to go where they're like, yes, I will forego sanitary water, clean water, hot water, running water, electricity to not be called a racist?
Well,
Like,
I think that there is almost no limit, because if you look at what happened in, I mean, we do have some historical, you could look at the Soviet Union, how that spread, or what goes on in North Korea and stuff like that. How people will, for the most part, people are sheep. What point will they push back? I don't know. I'm a lot more pessimistic about it than I once was. I used to think that there would be a line that, like, for example, what was that case in San Francisco where the illegal alien shot that woman, and then the parents came out and they were actually kind of being apologists for illegals. I was like,
no, it was Molly. It was no. That was not San Francisco. That was in Iowa, where the illegal immigrant like raped and murdered her and left her body in some field, and the family came out saying basically defending that stuff, but also the guy had knocked up the murderer rapist had knocked up some local girl, and so it's so he gets to extend his genetic line while ending the line of this family, or at least with this daughter. But they totally came out and but also she was anti-white anyways. This is kind of this just sad thing. I mean, hell, I was listening to a white girl last night at a local bar, just bad-mouthing white people. I was like, congratulations, honey. You're going to marry one, I presume, at some point, I would think. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Maybe you might just get a fur baby, or
I was going to say, fur baby. Yeah. So that, so I don't know. I mean, I don't have a lot of hope in, at least in the short intermediate term, for humanity. I mean, and I don't think that's necessarily pessimistic. I think that's just realistic. I mean, in the long run, I don't know. I mean, I think ultimately things always kind of balance themselves out, but just kind of hoping that people will one day wake up. I don't know if I really buy into that.
Well, I think the thing is, for me, it's more of not trying to change things, but don't be there when they're looking for someone to take it out on. They're going to need somebody to enable a lot of this behavior, within the military, or they're going to be looking for someone. They're going to be looking for a bailout, right? And this is kind of where I talk about this stuff, and people say, why do you care about what happens in society, with women and not getting married? Well, because they're going to get to a point where they know they're not going to get married. They're angry and bitter, and they're going to want to take it out on men that they feel like they were entitled to marrying. And when they see that guy either enjoying himself or going off and, what I'm doing, riding motorcycles, possibly dating younger women, they're not going to take lightly to it. And they're definitely going to start social political movements to restrict our behavior. I mean, you listen to what that crazy gal in the UK was talking about, having curfews for men. You don't think I would challenge anybody who ever listens to this. I dare you to bet me money that they will never put some sort of a law that bans men from dating women over the age of 18, but who are considered too young.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, because they wouldn't. I mean, there's nothing that an old harpy can't stand. You don't think if they can prevent a 21-year-old or a 24-year-old girl from renting a car, you don't think they can prevent a 24-year-old girl from dating a 33-year-old? Right. Yeah.
They say, oh, well, they can't do that because they're adults. It's we ban adults from doing things all the time. We don't let adults own pistols. We don't let adults rent cars. We don't let adults drink. We don't let them smoke tobacco. We don't let them order tobacco. People say, and especially with the last year, we've passed the issue where they say, oh, well, that's too intrusive. They literally get to control everything we do and say. Don't tell me that's beyond the board. Just say that they wouldn't do that just because they wouldn't do that. Okay, fine. Don't say that they're not capable of doing it. At least do that. But again, somebody wants to put any kind of monetary bet, by all means, do it.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the one silver lining I do have is what I'm starting to see now, and part of this is just because the Democrats won the election, but is the left starting to eat their the left's well, yeah. I mean, I didn't say free and fair election. I just said one. Is the left starting to eat their own? Like there was an interesting it was someone on my Twitter feed. I don't know who's tweeted it, but there was a March 8th, which actually happens to my birthday. Ironically enough, my birthday is on International Women's Day, which proves God doth have a sense of humor. But anyway, so there was a feminist march in Paris, and the Antifa people fought against the feminists because they viewed them as Islamophobic. Because, women's rights are, right. So that's why one of the reasons I always say that, Islam is right about women, because it's this huge, catch-22 for, leftists, right? You say Islam is right about women. Well, you're not saying right about what? You just say they're right about women, aren't they? What are you, an Islamophobe? Or then you're against women? Then so it's like things like that. So, ultimately, I don't know who came up with that phrase initially, but it's an old phrase.
It's kind of like the phrase, it's okay to be white. And when I remember some university was saying they're investigating for hate speech and saying we won't tolerate this kind of hate. And just the comments were like, what's wrong with being white?
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean that's hate speech? It's like saying it's okay to be a girl. It's okay to be a boy. It's okay to be black. Like,
it's okay to be a man. Yeah.
It's okay to be. It's like, whoa. What do you mean? And it's just funny how like they said that's hate speech. But of course, rhetorically, it's getting at the point where they don't believe that that's the case, because that's the whole point of their entire propaganda, is that it's not okay. And of course, then you get into the discussion. This is something I've pointed out with people, is that there's a book that people, not that I don't want to get too much on this topic, but like everybody needs to read a book called Explorations of Equatorial Africa. It was by a Franco-American explorer in the 1800s of the African continent. And he looked at a lot of things he was just exploring these tribes and what they believe in, whatever, but a lot of their beliefs explain the beliefs of today, where I always say that, they say race isn't biology. I go, right. It's a superstition. It's not about biology. It's not about science. It's not about skin color. It's about superstition. Because then they start talking about things that has to do with the quote unquote race, but then they start talking about like stuff that it's like, it doesn't make any sense unless you're talking about some sort of voodoo evil spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense outside of that context. And so it's so funny, like when I can't remember who it was, but they do these presentations on like white supremacy, and they list off all this stuff, and it's like it's so funny, like people who are not white are like, well, wait a minute, that's kind of my values too. Like, what are you talking about? What he's saying here? Yeah. They're like, well, how is that a racial thing? Like working hard, being diligent, or person like what? And so it's like, so I'll give an example also from this book. So there's this one scene where he's not to get too sidetracked, but I just thought this was a good story. So this he's a Franco-American Christian, and he's among these bunch of very superstitious pagan African tribe, and he's trying to shoot down this one bird, and he keeps missing. And they say, well, you can't hit him because that bird is possessed by a spirit, and he's protected by the gods. And of course, this guy's like, oh, I'm going to shoot that bastard now. So he loads like double his powder and just blows that thing right off that tree. Just completely obliterates it. And then he turns back to the guys. And he's like, oh, now they're going to admit that they don't believe what they believe. I guess what they said.
The gods abandoned him. I don't know.
They said, "Oh, well, you're white, so it doesn't apply to you."
Oh, okay.
It's like those spirits don't affect your. It's like he's just like, oh my trash.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of mental gymnastics that the
right.
left
But that's
does.
the point. It's like the mental gymnastics. He said he encountered this in this book countlessly, where they'd be like, "Oh, the evil spirits say this," and then he would go do something. And they're like, "Oh, well, it doesn't apply to you." It's like, well, what?
Well, yeah, well, anything to keep. Well, I mean, that's another thing that I believe in is that people when they adopt like a political ideology to the point where it becomes a religion, is that asking them to change it would be like the equivalent of asking them to cut off their own arm or their own leg, because it's that much a part of them. It becomes so much of their self identity that they can't. It's not simply a belief to them. It's how they define themselves. So that's a dangerous thing.
Right.
But hold on, we're gonna end this soon. But I do want you to before we go, I want you to tell us if you are working on anything now, in literary, and what your podcast, your journalism, or your fiction writing. What's going on with that?
I started a new novel. So what happened is I watched The Mandalorian during the Christmas season, and I loved it. And I realized what they did really well with it that made it work. They took the Western motif and they stuck it in Star Wars, and they took the man with no name, Clint Eastwood archetype, and they stuck that archetype in the Star Wars setting. So it basically allowed them to tell that kind of a story, but in the Star Wars universe. And that's why it worked so well. They weren't trying to tell a Star Wars story, because the Star Wars story is really about Luke Skywalker and the Skywalker family. And so I thought, okay, what would be another great miniseries to do in the Star Wars universe using that same strategy? Well, of course, it would be to take the film noir genre, which is based in an urban setting, and set it on Coruscant, which is a city planet. It's a city on one whole planet. And then use a Humphrey Bogart type archetype as the main character and do something.
I like this. Okay.
So I wrote this whole script, or not script, but like I wrote a whole outline for this because I was really actually serious about pitching this to Disney. And in hindsight, I was wise to do this, but I just said, you know what? They're not going to accept it. One of the reasons is that I'm not related to somebody's nephew in Hollywood. They're not going to listen to me. I'm some schmo. I've heard too many.
And you're not a member of the tribe.
Don't trust me. I have WASP friends who are in Hollywood, and they tell me stories. Anyways, so I was like, yeah, it was like that. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be listened to, so I'd rather just write my own novel. So I've been working on my own novel that incorporates the entire plot, and I've created kind of a bare bones universe. It's not Star Wars, but it's like, if you like Star Wars, you'll like it. But it's definitely a film noir type plot with so it's basically like a combination of Star Wars, Casablanca, and the Maltese Falcon. If you like those, you'll like this book.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I love Maltese Falcon is one of my favorite movies of all time. And actually, Casablanca, I can quote every line from that movie.
You despise me, don't you? Well, if it gave you any thought, I probably would.
I mean, it's
I was watching that film multiple times. Like, I didn't want to use. I'm not plagiarizing any of the quotes, but like I wanted that kind of that kind of like sarcastic but witty dialogue, in some of these scenes, and so the main character, he's not Humphrey Bogart, but there's definitely like I wanted it to be where there's hints and definitely inspirations, but it's different enough to where it's refreshingly original, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like,
well, I mean, but some of those, I mean, there's some lines from Casablanca. I was joking around with my friend the other night. Like, have you ever heard the expression like, "Oh, I love William Shakespeare. The only problem is he uses too many cliches." It's kind of,
yeah.
It's kind of like there's lines from Humphrey Bogart that it's okay to. Excuse me, not. There's lines from Casablanca where it's okay to reuse them because they've
been used. Yeah.
Well, they're ingrained in the modern nomenclature, for example. You know what I mean? Like they're just there. They're like Shakespeare, you got to be cruel to be kind, or the method to my madness. These are a lot of people don't realize that those all come from Shakespearean plays. You know what I mean? That's just
right.
So I would think that, like, when it comes to fiction writing, that's totally okay to use lines from like Casablanca, because
I was trying to make similar lines, I'm gonna just give a teaser for like the opening. The opening line is where somebody says, "Sir, I think you might have a drinking problem," and he says, "Yeah, my drink's empty. That's a problem." Like that kind of line, or where some girl says like, don't you think I'm attractive? And he goes, well, if I paid any attention to your figure as much as you pay attention to me, I probably would.
Yeah.
Like something like that, where it's kind of a similar, and there's certain archetypes and characters who are similar from some of those other movies, but they're different enough in like their circumstances where they can show different types of emotions or sides of their personality that maybe didn't show up in the films. But like where this film is going.
Right.
In that sense, like it's going to end. Like interesting thing about the Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, and I didn't even realize this until we just now, is for people who haven't seen it, just stomp out your ears and listen later after you've watched it.
And if you haven't seen those two movies, what the fuck is wrong with you? Excuse my French.
Exactly.
Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
It involves him rejecting a woman he's in love with for a higher cause. Humphrey Bogart rejects both women for a higher cause. One's a political war cause. The other one is more of a, I'm a private detective and one of your own.
When your partner gets killed. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'll have a few hard nights when I've sent you over, but that'll pass.
Yeah. That was it. I don't have the Maltese Falcon memorized, but I do have.
I watched that. Oh gosh, I watched that on the big screen.
Really? When was that?
Oh yeah.
Where was it?
That was in Kirkland, back in like 2014. It was years ago. I watched that
sweet.
in Casablanca. Man, when I know Aaron would disagree because he's got his tranny affections, but when Ingrid Bergman came on screen.
Oh yeah, what the fuck is him not liking Ingrid Bergman? I don't understand that shit.
All I do is I just send him the link to his video saying that Michelle Obama is hot, and I just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's right. He thought Michelle Obama was good looking. I'm like, what is wrong with this man?
Anyways, so we're there, and there was a bunch of parents who brought their teenage boys and girls to watch it. And when Ingrid Bergman walked in that film, I heard all the boys around behind me go, "Whoa!" Like they just went, "Whoa!" Like, "Whoa!" Like this is a woman. Like I've never seen a woman like this. And she was only 25 or 26, so she wasn't like crazy. She was, within my age group at that time. God,
right? Yeah.
If any guy who meets a girl with that level of sophistication and class at age 26, it's like, if you didn't marry the girl, we get to murder you. Like you did something wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So like, but they understood like this was a type of woman that they had never seen before in their lives.
Well, I got a question for you about the character of I'm trying to remember. God, Ingrid Bergman. I'm trying to remember her character's name in the film. Ilsa. Yeah, Ilsa Lund.
Yes.
Did she love? Who was she actually in love with?
Oh, she was totally in love. Like my opinion,
Rick?
I read a book actually on the script, and I read a kind of a analysis, and I think it's accurate. Is that, and she even says, she hints at it in the movie where she talked about how she. I don't think she actually says that she loves her husband. She said like she looked up to him and worshipped him in a way that she thought was love. Like what she was trying to explain to Rick is like, I thought I loved him, but I actually love you. And she was willing to go away with him. She was willing to leave her husband and be with Rick. Rick was the one who, in the end, turned her, basically said, you got to go with your husband. He chose.
Well, he said you'll regret it, not today, not tomorrow, but someday soon, and for the rest of your life.
The great classic line. And so I think obviously with the relationship, it was clear she admired her husband for what he was in an ideological sense. But I mean, as the writer of the book kind of pointed out, not to be crass, but like it was clear who was the better lover, you know?
Yeah, well, that was a line from Harry Met Sally when they were talking about Casablanca. Have you seen that movie, Harry Met Sally, where they're talking about Casablanca?
No, but I need to watch the full version of Play It Again, Sam, where Woody Allen is like got Humphrey Bogart following around. He's like, yeah, you don't want to get those candles. That's for a Jewish holiday. Get some romantic candles.
Yeah, that was. I remember. Yeah, because the way it ends, that movie, Play It Again, Sam. Because a lot of people don't know this. In the film Casablanca, he never says, "quote Play it again, Sam."
Yeah, he never says it. No, and
he says, "Play it, Sam, play it." But he never said, "Play it again, Sam." So that was the name of the Woody Allen film, and the way the Woody Allen film ends. Play It Again, Sam. The film was when he tells, was it Keaton? What's that her name?
Diane Keaton. Yeah,
Diane Keaton, when he gave her the speech. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. And she goes, "Oh, that's beautiful." He goes, "It's from Casablanca, and I waited my whole life to say it." It's like
yeah.
It's funny, but what I heard was the Ingrid Bergman had a daughter who actually became a gossip columnist, like one of those Page Six gossip columnists in New York, and she asked the director. And maybe you could clarify this because you said you were privy to some inside stuff, that she was asking the director, "Who am I supposed to be in love with?" And the director never gave her a straight answer.
Well, I think the reason why, I mean, honestly, I think part of what's biasing that is that the guy who played her husband she didn't get along with him, and neither did Humphrey Bogart. So I think that was partly why there was kind of a distancing. And you know what's funny is like there was that one line that kind of for me said it all, is where he said, "I love you very much, Ilsa," and she goes, "Your secret is safe with me." Like basically saying like nobody knows, like you don't show anything, you're not an emotional guy. And I think, and then there was that scene again. This was the book I read where he's analyzing the scene in the movie where Humphrey Bogart propositions her and basically says like, "Yeah, I work in a saloon, but I live up a stairs. Like I'll be waiting for you." And she kind of gives him this look like she's really tempted, and he doesn't just shut his mouth. He says like, "You'll be there. You'll lie to what's his name," and that's when
Laszlo.
Yeah, "You'll lie to Laszlo. You'll be there," and that's where he's like basically kicking her in the face, and that's when she gets really defensive, and so I think that she romantically loved him more. But I just think, but that's the thing is like the whole story was about the romance between her and Humphrey Bogart. I think that she loved him more than her husband, but the problem is like she already said that she already married him. Like she already married this guy.
And back then in 1941, that meant something. Yeah.
I know, it's crazy. You actually say you'll be with somebody for life, and you actually stick with them for life. It's crazy.
Yeah, but that was 1941. So yeah. I mean, can you imagine if they remade that like Ghostbusters or something? Yeah, no, it is true though, because there was that thing where there was the idea that when you marry someone, well, this is when they said till death do us part, like they meant it. I mean, that was
but at the same time, there was that one scene where basically she said she wasn't willing to leave him again, Humphrey Bogart, and basically the idea was like her husband will get on the plane and leave them, and so that kind of spoke to the it's interesting. Remember what Captain Renault says at the end? He goes, "I know a little thing about women. She left, but she knew you were lying."
Yeah, I do remember that line. That was a great line.
I think that what Humphrey Bogart was basically planning to do was do exactly what he did, which is,
Well, he said it to her in the end. He goes, "Ilsa, I'm no good at being noble, but it doesn't take whatever to realize that the the lives of three people don't add up to a hill of beans in this crazy world.
And what I've got to be a part of, you can't have anything to do with. Like, he knows he's gonna.
He goes, I got a job to do too. Yeah.
Basically, I mean, like, we can speculate, but my guess is he's probably going to end up dead.
Yeah,
he's probably going to end up dead, or he's going to go fight, or he's going to go do something, and like it would get her killed. And so the only way for her to go is to go with her husband, but like it's not for her to wait for him to be alive. And so I think that's and honestly, I mean, what's funny is, like, in some ways that's almost more painful for the husband, because she gets to speculate on what might have been for the rest of her life. Whereas he, like, if she had stayed with him, she'd have found out.
Interesting.
That makes sense. Because they end on like a very romantic note, where now she gets to basically relive that moment for the rest of their life. Like he says, we'll always have Paris, right?
Yeah,
yeah. Like, he's not going to say we'll always have North Africa.
that didn't have the same ring to it, does it?
Right.
But
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, like, you have to take it in the context of, like, it was the good versus evil thing, and like ultimately you could kind of argue that the film was kind of about Richard Blaine's redemption, right? He goes from being this nihilist because of of her leaving him, right, where he doesn't really believe in anything. Like, do you remember the scene when they're at the cafe and Major Strauss is there along with a couple of the Nazis, and they go, an enemy of the Reich has come to Casablanca, and he's like, well, my interest in whether or not Victor Laszlo stays or goes is purely a sporting one. And Major Strauss says, well, in this case, you have no sympathy for the fox. He goes, not necessarily. I understand the point of view of the hound as well. He was just, that was the banter in that movie was fucking brilliant. Excuse my French, but it was.
Yeah, it was the best. It was probably, this is, what's really fascinating is that it wasn't meant to be this great film, but this book I have on Hollywood scripts that was written by a Hollywood screenwriter, he said, it's one of the best Hollywood films ever written because of not only the dialogue, but the story structure is flawless. He said, that film balanced and juggled numerous subplots within the first 5 minutes of the film. Like, it's just like, and flawlessly, like, where you're not getting confused about what's happening. Everything's happening in a very fluid, smooth motion. But yeah, like some of the dialogue, like that dialogue is brilliant. Or where they go, like he says, like, what's your nationality? I'm a drunkard.
I'm a drunkard. Yeah.
that makes him a citizen of the world. I was born in New York City. If that'll help anything, he goes, are you one of those Americans who can't imagine us in our beloved Paris? Oh, it wasn't my beloved Paris. And then the one German guy goes, can you imagine us in London?
When you get there, ask me. Yeah.
The best. And then he goes, how about New York? And he goes, Major, there's certain sections in New York City I would not advise you to try to invade.
Yeah, that was growing up, a New York boy like myself, yeah. I love that line. Yeah, that was just a great. You could just imagine, like, when that aired in New York City, everybody just clapping. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And probably half the mafia was like, yeah.
Well, Major, there are certain sections of New York I wouldn't advise you to try to invade. Yeah. And then he goes, excuse me, gentlemen, your business is politics, mine is running a saloon. Like, he was this kind of like nihilist guy. And like, even when, what's his name? The guy, that's right. What right do I have to think? The one that shot
Peter
the couriers.
Lorre. Yeah. Peter Lorre. Yeah.
But remember, he was so neat because he goes, I have many friends in Casablanca, but just because you despise me, you're the only one I trust.
Yeah.
I mean, exactly. That's a fucking brilliant line, man. Who would have thought of writing that? Just because you despise me, you're the only one I trust. Well,
what's funny is in that when he goes, wait a minute, those two German couriers were carrying letters of transit too, and he goes, oh yeah,
poor devils.
And he goes, you're right, Hogate. I am a little more impressed with you.
Yeah.
Or like when he tells the German banker that he can't come in, and he goes, Well, watching you with the German banker now, one would think you've been doing this for all your life. Yeah, who says I haven't? No one. But I was just thinking, you thought what?
Yeah.
Who am I to
That's
think?
right. What right do I have to think? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like the dialogue. That's what I miss about films nowadays is because they have. We're going to stick to Casablanca, but I'm just saying, films back then they had to rely on dialogue, right? And nowadays they can pull up. They can do their CGI and all the blow stuff up. But things like Casablanca, to be honest, I think my favorite character in Casablanca was Captain Renault.
Oh, he's the best. And some of his lines, like when he says, he's talking with Rick and he goes, how about 5,000 francs or what is it, 20,000 francs? I say he escapes. Make it 10. I'm only a poor corrupt official.
Yeah. How extravagant you are throwing away women like that. One day they may be scarce. And then
he goes, when it comes to women, you're a true Democrat.
Yeah. And he goes. I often wondered why you came to Casablanca. He goes, did you abscond with the church funds? Did you run away with a senator's wife? I like to think you killed a man. It's the romantic in me.
It's a combination of all three.
Yeah. What did Rick say? He goes, I came. He goes. I
came to Casablanca for the waters. What waters? Or the desert. Well, I was misinformed.
Yeah, I mean that was brilliant stuff, man.
I think the other one was with Captain Renault is when what was some of the ones where the best so because of the Hollywood censors back then, they couldn't be very overt with some of the sexual stuff. So there was the one scene where the Bulgarian gal comes in and he's like, why are you in here? You're underage. She goes, I'm here with Captain Renault. And he goes, that makes sense.
Oh, no. He said, oh, yeah. He goes, and then she goes, I'm with my husband. And he goes, well, Captain Renault's getting broad-minded.
Yeah, she's basically like trying to say in these so many words, like, I'm going to hook up with Captain Renault to get these letters of transit. Like, you're a man. If your woman did this, what would you feel? How would you feel about it? And he says, like, if a woman loved you this much and she didn't, and he goes, nobody ever loved me that much. Yeah.
Well, no, that was the sad part, though. Remember, he goes, no one's ever loved me that much. And then she goes, what kind of man is Captain Renault? And Captain Renault, and he goes, well, like any other, only more so.
Oh, dude. So this is I've told this story before, but there was this one time I was at this local kind of tavern lodge type place in my area. And I'm there, I'm having a drink, and there's this local bar gal, like she's brand new. She doesn't know anything about, like, there's 20 different types of beers, and these customers come in, and they come in, and they're older people, and they ask for a beer, and they're like, well, which beer should we get? And she knows that I'm like a longtime local there, so she turns to me and she goes, she just points at one of them. Yeah, she does. She just points and goes, well, what kind of beer is this? And I go, I don't know. And like any other kind of beer, only more so. and the guy, of course, is old enough to where he starts laughing because he gets the line. And she's like, huh?
Yeah, she was like, out to lunch when you said that. And he just laughed his ass off.
Yeah. And then, of course, in the movie, he goes, you want my advice? Go back to Bulgaria. Yeah. And then, of course, he helps the husband get the
have you tried 22 tonight?
Yeah. And he goes,
I said,
cash your chips and don't come back.
Yeah. And then he asked the roulette dealer, he goes, how are we doing tonight? He goes, well, a few thousand francs less than I thought they'd be.
Yeah. We know many illegal activities have occurred here, Rick, but we know you haven't been involved. That's why we don't shut you down. Really? I think because I let you win at roulette. That is another reason.
Yeah. That was, and then the famous line, I'll let you say it. The famous line, he goes, when he blows the whistle, he goes, this place is to be closed at once. He goes, what right have you got to be closing me down?
I'm shocked to discover gambling here. Sir, you're winning,
sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, everyone.
That was that was just, that's what I'm saying. Like that was like, the book that you read, it was nearly perfect. I mean, how do you get better than that? It's kind of like, that's the fucking Mona Lisa of the films of that time period.
Well, and what's sad is, like, try having banter with a girl like that at an age, like this is kind of this is, again, I'm just making an observation. Girls who are older. I'm not saying like I'm saying older women that are past an age that I'm interested in them.
Right.
Like, I need to make that clear. Like they're past that age. We can do this banter, and it works because they come from a period of time when banter was still part of it. You try doing that with girls under a certain age, and it's like you toss the tennis ball to them, and they just look at you like, I've never seen a round thing before in my life. Whereas I remember there was this
it's like trying to catch with a cat, right? When you throw the ball at a dog and you throw the ball at the cat, just like
people know. It's just like there was this one job I worked where there was this older lady, and we had a banter back and forth that was like something out of one of these films. Like it was just so like she had a wit because she was from that era, like where it was okay to have wit. But you do that with younger girls, they're like, huh? I don't understand. What? Like, as other people point out, millennials, men and women, I'll pick on both people.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could kind of say the same. In fairness, you could kind of say the same thing for the men as well.
Yeah, like they are literal. They don't understand figures of speech at all. Right. They're very literal people. So if you say, like I've said, I like I'm gone on dates or I've hung out with girls and I make kind of bantering comments and they like take it literally. Like, like there was this.
There's no nuance. There's no nuance.
Oh, there's totally no nuance. It's like I'm kind of sitting there like I'm in a living hell.
Like, get me out of here.
Well, what's sad is like, I used to talk back in the day when they were still alive, a lot of these Greatest Generation people, and like the women, their wit was like something to behold because they like had to be on their toes.
Yes, because they had to rely on that. Like, well, I think I don't know if I linked it on your Twitter, but the verbal fencing that went on. It's one of my favorite movies, Dangerous Liaisons. It's from like circa 1989. At the end scene between John Malkovich and Glenn Close, that was some of the greatest male-female verbal fencing I've ever seen on film.
Right.
I don't know if you remember.
Well, I was talking to one of these gals. Like she was in her 80s, early 90s, and she was just describing the World War II. The 1940s was a man's world. If you had a uniform on, you basically had like it was literally it was like having an OnlyFans account.
The male, inverse.
Yeah, like you could go up to any girl you wanted and ask her on a date. It will say the more chaste version of the OnlyFans. Like you could ask a girl out on a dance, and you could go dance with a girl, and you could go like date, in a chaste manner, I suppose, multiple girls at the same time. But like girls had to compete for you, whereas today it's men competing for girls. And so a lot of these girls, like you had to understand men. And if a man had a certain wit, you had to be just as witty. So this is why, you have women from that era that were just full of wit because they had to be, because you couldn't just be a cute girl. Because guess what? Cute girls in the 1940s were a dime a dozen. You could go get great. That girl doesn't want to talk to you. There's another girl over there who looks even better. And she's better on the dance floor and she's got better wit. Like, great. Like,
well, that was part of the whole thing though. Like same thing about like in Europe, more so the United States, but like after World War I, because like in France, like all the men died. Like I forget how many men died in particularly France got hit the hardest of all the European. I mean, they all got fucked up, but it was all men that died in wars back in those days. So there just wasn't many to go around. So
that's the problem with a lot of the boomers is that I don't know if this is accurate, but I think it's probably there's part some truth. There wasn't nearly like the ratio of men to women in earlier times was more like there was more women than men. So men were just more whatever. And so now we're kind of either at this where either it's more even, but also it's just like, I mean, there's other things that are leading to it, but the fact is, like, you could be a total dork back in the day, and you could do pretty well. Like, what was considered attractive, like, this is where I've mentioned this on multiple live streams, and people might think that I'm a little, like, obsessed with this, but like, there was a guy who posted a blog post last year about how men have too high. The reason men and women aren't getting married is because men have too high expectations of women.
Oh, is this like a preacher guy or something?
Yeah. I was like, what planet is this guy living on? like that is, I was thinking about this today while I was working out. I was like, that is the biggest delusion. That is far more delusional than anything that the left believes. Believing that men can become women is less delusional than believing that men are, like, deliberately avoiding marriage to cute, attractive, sweet, witty girls. Like, the idea that guys who are overweight and, got their face stuffed with pizza are avoiding Ingrid Bergman's because they want to play Fortnite. Like, it's like, what retarded idiot thinks this? No, and the thing is, like, I know he doesn't think that. He can't possibly think that. He's not, like, nobody is that stupid. If you're that stupid, you are not, like, you're not running, like, you can't tie your own shoes.
Right. Well, I mean, if a guy is like 70 though, like, he could think that way because he would be from a generation that's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how old this guy is, but
he's in his 70s. Yeah, he's definitely an old geezer who's, the thing is, here's the other problem. He probably hasn't, he's talked to like 3 dorks and pretty boys and like, mouth breathers and yes men in his community. And so, like, that's his whole basis. Whatever it is, I don't know. He's also from an area where, like, the majority of women are right wing. So, okay, gotcha, great. We don't all live in your Christian version of the Northwest imperative, you halfwit. Like, he's got his little commune of people. Great. We're talking about the map. He wasn't writing about his community. He was writing about the whole country as a whole. And so that's what, like, really bothered me. It's like, like, I think about all that's been lost in the last 70, 80 years of our culture, as far as, like, the feminine, like, what's been destroyed. And I see it all the time. So for someone to say, oh, well, the only reason men aren't getting married today is because they have too high standards, it's like expecting more, like let's compare. I could rant, but, like, we just talked about Ingrid Bergman, and then, like, compare
to, like, what it was, what is the equivalent today of that? I mean, it's it just doesn't exist. I mean,
and people might say, oh, well, Ingrid Bergman was a Hollywood actress, whatever. It's like, okay, great. There was the guy who did the pinups, the World War II pinups. He was his name was Vargas, and the reason he ended up doing pinups is because he was planning to make a temporary trip to America. I think it was European or whatever. I can't remember which, but he was in America temporarily, and he stayed because he was struck by how so many beautiful girls there were in America.
Oh, no shit. Okay.
Yeah. He said they were everywhere, and they were all, like, kind of gave off this, like, what do you think of me vibe? Like,
well, is that because, like, all the men were, like, in the service, so the women were hyper...
No, this was before World War before World War II. This was, like, in the late 30s or whatever. But, like, he just said there were pretty girls everywhere. It was kind of like reminds me when I was in Paris. I've never seen so many pretty girls, and they all were like they were dressed very feminine, and they were dressed very modestly, and they were very in good shape, and it was, like, very like the ideal French girl. Like, they all were, I'm not joking when I say, like, half of them were riding bicycles with a baguette in a basket in the front. Like, it was this, I was kind of like, what tourist guy paid him off? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like does someone like pay them off to make it look like I'm in a Hemingway thing at the cafe here?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, what I didn't realize is like Central Paris is where all the wealth is. So that's where, like, you know, I'm in the area, like, as opposed to America, like you go to downtown Seattle, that's not where the wealth is.
I know it's the opposite in Paris. Like the suburbs are where all the poor immigrants are, and the center is where the money. Yeah, it's the opposite of how it is in the United States. That I do know. But no, keep going.
Yeah, so like I just think about how much has been lost in terms of like women understanding their own femininity. And people would say, what about masculine? It's like, okay, great. But there are, like, as a man, I'm not claiming to be Chad, like, you know, Conan the Barbarian. Like, I don't have biceps that like break metal or whatever, but I would consider myself a pretty masculine man. And so, or at least I try as much as possible. So,
well, it's not just about like physicality though. Like, isn't masculinity just because, I mean, you could be, you know, in good physical shape, but you could be a total just
loser, right? Like, well, like Humphrey Bogart was not physically strong, but
or imposing. He was short. Like, I mean, and one of the reasons, quick circle back to Bogart, like one of the reasons Bogart became or had his shot, I mean, he was a very good actor, was because so many of the younger actors had gotten drafted. That's why he got his shot. A lot of people don't realize that, because he didn't have the classic, you know, because back in those days it was about looks, you know, like it wasn't necessarily about, you know, acting chops. It was like, do you have a, you know, to be the leading man at least, and because so many of the younger actors had been drafted, that's how he got his shot. He was short and he was, you know, he was older, and you know, I mean,
he was also not a big guy. Like, he was not physically imposing. What made him imposing was just like his like whole
bravado
aura, his bravado and his ability to carry himself. But I would just say, like, but for men like me, like, we're not pushovers, and we're not living in our mother's basements, and we're not overweight, and we're not apologetic about our masculinity, and we're not nice guys. We're not pushovers. So I would say that for people who say, well, there's not a lot of masculine men out there. Well, great. Okay. I'm not one of those soy boy millennials. So my perspective is saying I'm on the outlier of this. This is what I'm seeing. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of women who are not capable of engaging in the kind of banter. Now, there are some women that I know who are like that. And that's
yeah, but
cool.
they're going to be snatched up right away. I mean,
right, but that's the problem, is like by the time you meet them and you're like, oh my gosh, this girl's great. Either that, or there's a reason why. Again, I'm not trying to be a cynic here, but if a girl's really good at banter and wit, it's probably because she's had to rely on that, because she's not, like, she may not be ugly, she may not be an ogre, but she doesn't look like Ingrid Bergman. She looks like, you know, something like
Michelle Obama.
No, she doesn't look like there was a couple of, I mean, in all fairness, there were a couple of girls I knew over the years that like had good banter and they were fun. I was just not interested in them for various reasons. And but it's just like, I would also say, like, just that femininity that you would see in older films, but also, like, I think you saw in larger society. And I know that some cynics would say, oh, well, it's all just bar soap commercials and it's advertising trying to deceive you. And yes, that in a lot of ways they were trying to sell a reality that didn't exist. I think that that's definitely the case in a lot of circumstances. On the whole, though, we're talking about on the collective. I think that women, the reality is that in that generation, women had to understand men. Whereas today, men have to understand women. I think that's the difference. So women have to communicate in a way that men will understand. Back in let's say the 40s or the 50s or whatever. Whereas, you know, nowadays, women don't have to. You know, Fred Reed, who's a columnist, he wrote an article where he said, a lot of women don't, they understand men the same way a bear trap understands a bear. Like they know
Great
how to trap.
visual there, man. All right.
Like they can trap a man, but they don't understand a man. Like they just don't, like a lot of these girls, just based on some of the stuff I see with these online dating apps where I see these girls, it's like they know how to like attract a man, but they don't know how to keep a man. They don't know what keeps a man around. And some of the stuff that they say is just like, it's like, that's great, honey. I don't care. I really don't care about like the stuff that you're talking. I think that this is a problem with both men and women, is they think that having similar interests generates attraction. Whereas chemistry is more like, I could have nothing in common with a girl. She doesn't have to like Casablanca. She doesn't have to like any of these movies. She doesn't have to like any of the stuff I like. But if we have good chemistry, that overrides all that stuff. Whereas if you meet a girl you're not physically interested in or romantically interested in or whatever, she can love everything you like. It's like, that's nice. I don't want to watch that movie with you. I want to watch that movie with that other girl who was not interested in it, but I'm interested in her. Right. So it's like people are trying to find similar interest, and that's where it's funny about seeing on like dating profiles where people talk about, you'll win me over if you do this. It's like, no, I won't.
No, I think that's true. I think that like the idea of similarity is like the only caveat I'd add to that was that to have a relationship that lasts, you have to have similar values, but not similar interests.
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, that's probably true. It's like similar values for a long-term relationship, but
yeah,
I think that's the problem. Is a lot of people confuse a lot of that stuff. Like they're so lost. Like they think that. I'm sorry, posting a photo of yourself in front of the Tower of Pisa or Machu Picchu or the Cliffs of Moher, like it doesn't do anything for me. That just tells me that you traveled. Like, great, you traveled.
Well, yeah, if you're a girl, that means you're a slut. I mean, if you're single and you're traveling, that means you're a slut. Why else? Why are you traveling alone? I mean, that means you're a tramp.
Oh, dude, that's what. Well, there was that whole girl in the UK was murdered recently, and they're talking about imposing curfews for men and all that stuff. I'm like, I read all these dating profiles where they talk about how they passed out at some dive bar in the middle of rural Europe at 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, yeah, like I'm sorry, I don't want to hear anything about how that you feel unsafe.
I agree 100%. Like that's like look, if I were to tell you that, when I was just in New York not so long ago, and if I was walking through Harlem at 3 o'clock in the morning with a sign that said "I hate," yeah. You would probably say, "Yeah, I'm sorry, John is dead," but you know what? That's a Darwin Award. Yeah, he was a decent guy and fun to talk to, but you know what? Hey, I mean, you tempt fate. That's what happens to you. Is that kind of your point?
Yeah, well, what my problem is, like them doing this in foreign countries and then coming back here and saying, I don't feel safe doing ordinary things here because of so and so. It's like, and it's all your men's fault. It's like, okay, great. If you don't feel safe here, then you don't get to travel overseas alone. Like that's not how. Okay, yeah, it's like I don't want to hear you guys. This is where I get really, no joke. Like I've told a buddy of mine this, and we had a bit of a discussion about it. I said, if I read a girl's dating app and she brags about doing something unsafe in another foreign country, I immediately swipe. I'm done, because like, for me, that's a signal of somebody who doesn't have good sense. Like they either engage in reckless behavior, or I promise you, they're the ones who are like, I don't want to go on and I'll say why. I've asked numerous girls over the years to go hiking, and a lot of them have flaked. And one of the things I get from men is, oh, well, she doesn't know if you're like going to murder her, in the bushes or something like that. And my response is like, okay, then first of all, just say, no, thank you. I don't want to go hiking, but let's meet up for coffee somewhere. Right. Like,
Right.
you can say no and suggest some other place just to be safe. Thirdly, these girls all go overseas by themselves and travel. Like, don't give me like I'm trying to not be, use profanity, but like, if I give off, first of all, if you think if the way I come off with you is that you think that I'm going to be an axe murderer, then you're an idiot. So that kind of just clears it up for me. And then the fact that you go travel in some other countries by yourselves, I don't, I would say this to my buddies, like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that they say they don't feel safe going hiking, 3 or 4 miles away from where they live because they don't know who. Like, if you don't trust the guy, then just say no. Okay, that shows the lack of maturity on their part. They can't say no. Just say no, thank you, or like whatever it is. Like, I don't have a problem with that. If they just say I'm not interested in going hiking or whatever, and I don't think that has anything to do with it. I don't think it has anything to do with safety. I think it's just they're idiots.
Yeah, no, I get. I'm just laughing about like some chick like on her Tinder profile having a picture of herself in like Kabul or something in Afghanistan, and then at the same time when you were asking, you want to just go hiking like in Washington, it's like, oh no, I don't feel safe there. He's just like.
Well, I mean, yeah, the girls don't actually. No girls are. Well, one older woman said that, and I just kind of said, "Oh, really? So like, no girls ever traveled overseas by herself?" And they kind of like, they're like, "Oh, well, they start kind of spurging." I'm like, I don't want to hear it. Like, I hear all the time, like, gotta go travel. I gotta travel the world. I gotta travel, do all this stuff. It's like, and then I read about one who like, shows up in London and passes out at some bar after a red light. What do they call it? A red eye flight where they like, they have no sleep. And then they, find themselves waking up in some pub in the middle of the morning. It's like, okay, I know where this is going. This is, if nothing else, it shows a lack of like good judgment, but also at some point they're going to say, I don't feel safe doing this. It's like, yeah, you kind of lost your right to argue that point. Somewhere between here and London, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's impulse control, judgment, just and just general mores. I mean, if they're engaging in that kind of behavior, because that's the one that you heard about. I mean, how many other examples of this that happened to them that didn't end up where they actually had to experience a consequence of it. But one thing because we were talking about novels, you said that you were actually reading, it's one of my favorite films of all time. You said you were reading the novel by Somerset Maugham. Have you finished it?
The Razor's Edge. Yeah.
Yes.
That one was, there's a lot of politically incorrect statements in that book.
Yeah. Well, first off, have you finished the novel?
I have not finished the novel. It's on my table. Yeah, it's.
Have you?
I know that I need to see the movie because Gene Tierney was in that, and she's one of my favorite actresses from that time period.
Yeah, she was great, and also Anne Baxter was in it, who actually won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress.
Yeah, there's I know that there was one scene that was lifted right from the book where Gene Tierney is just livid that the main character is falling for some girl. He's like, "You think I've given up everything for him to fall for a girl like that?" And the one guy goes, "Oh, what did you give up? Or why did you give him up?" I gave him up because I didn't want to get in the way. He goes, "You gave him up for like some sort of like diamond or something, like basically like for money." And she's just livid. Yeah,
like, the novel is good, but it's like, I think I said this to you in a tweet, where it's one of those rare occasions where actually the film is superior.
Yeah, I gotta finally watch the film at some point.
Yeah, because it's got Tyrone Power, Anne Baxter, Gene Tierney. Actually, she worked with Humphrey Bogart in some films too. She actually suffered from mental illness.
Yeah, I actually watched the documentary. Her life was really tragic. She looked, when she was young, she looked much older. The problem is that carried with her. A lot of her best films were in her 20s. And I swear to God, her last film was when she was 44. She looked like she was in her 60s.
Wow.
Like she just did. She looked. I mean, it's kind of like honestly, it's like Lauren Bacall. Lauren Bacall was stunning at 19, but man, by the time she was like 30, by the time she was 30, she looked old, and by the time she was in her like 40s and her 50s, she looked much older. Like Lauren Bacall just aged very quickly, and that's kind of where men who are looking at marriage need to take a much closer look at the woman they're going to marry, because, you know, as Fred Reed has pointed out, for a lot of these girls, not all of them. What was the name of that? I was just thinking about this. She was from the Avengers film. Marisa Tomei.
Marisa Tomei.
Yes.
Oh yeah, she does. That woman doesn't age, man. She's like what's the guy from American Bandstand? Like they joked about him. He never. Dick Clark. She doesn't get old. I think she's a lesbian, actually. Unfortunately.
Jeez.
Well, she's never been with the guy. She's never married. I never heard her being. Maybe she's not, but I mean.
She's not like Charlize Theron, where she was stunning in her 20s, and now it's like, good lord. But the whole point is like that is an example of a girl where she maintained her looks and her kind of youth or vitality as she
vitality, yeah, absolutely.
Whereas Jane Turney, by the time she was 44, she's like playing the old maid type girl where there's no band, like there's none of that. There's none of that youthfulness that was coming from the Aunt May from the Avengers film. And so, you know, there's certain girls who are able to pull that off, and it's like, okay, you're kind of playing.
I think you're done. I think for the Avengers film, you're not talking about Marisa Tomei. I think you were talking about oh God, what's her name? I don't think that was Marisa Tomei, who actually is gorgeous, but you're thinking of the other one. God, what the hell is her name? She used to do a lot of movies in the 80s with Matt Dillon. Blanking on it. The one who played Superman's mom? Is that
Marisa Tomei is the name. It was the actress who played Aunt May in the Avengers film.
Oh, okay, it was her. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, yeah, no, and
she did a film. The kind of the funny part is like she did a film with Robert Downey Jr. years back in the early 90s. Like this kind of romantic comedy. And so like for them to be playing in the same movie again was kind of part of the joke. But like, yeah, he's like, yeah, you're stunningly attractive aunt.
You're talking about somebody from My Cousin Vinny, right? The same.
Let me actually look up the film that she was in. Good Lord, why is her name not coming up? I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of ridiculously stupid. I repeat myself. Romantic comedy.
I don't remember her with Robert Downey Jr., but that could 80s, God knows.
Let me look it up. Good grief. Yeah, she was from My Cousin Vinny. Let me actually look up her filmography.
She was gorgeous in My Cousin Vinny.
Oh, it was called Only You.
I never saw that one.
It was a romantic comedy. I was forced to watch it when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's one you could skip, in other words, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not watching it first of all, I'm not watching it by myself. And if I had a chick over, it's like, yeah, we're going to watch this. Maybe if I have to, like, if you're Ingrid Bergman and you're asking me to watch it, like, okay, I'll make an exception. I'll make an exception for this.
I'll watch Attack of the Killer Tomatoes if you're Ingrid Bergman. But yeah, no, I get it. Okay, so it's not absolutely deathly horrible, but it's not on your top 10 list. I got it. So anyway, what about this? What about her?
Oh, she's like in her 50s in the Avengers film, but she looks really young and youthful and has vitality that a lot of women lose. I mean, I'm not joking, man. I look through a lot of these dating profiles, and these women are in their 20s and they look like they're in their 50s. It's insane.
Yeah, it's kind of. I wonder how much of that is. Actually, a friend of mine said something like that. You wear your body ends up just wearing the decisions of your life on it. Like it's kind of like the what was the name of that book by what was that homo guy that no, it's Dorian Gray, the guy the picture age, but he didn't he lived this what the hell was the name of the writer? God, I can't remember his name.
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde, yeah, that homosexual pedophile.
They should have locked that ass up.
He was in prison. He did go to prison.
Justice does prevail sometimes.
but the story, Dorian Gray was like, so he lived this hedonistic lifestyle, but it was the picture that bore all the scars, but he didn't. But anyway, my friend was drawing a parallel to that, saying that, like, basically in the long run, that's how that works for people too. Like, if you engage in this lifestyle, not just physically, but also just the lifestyle choices you make. You know what I mean? I'm not just talking about like eating too much or things like that. I mean, just everything else. It just kind of, wears on you, almost like it's almost like a karmic thing. I don't know. It just, evens. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but that's what his overall philosophy was. And I think there might be some truth to that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that it shows on their, like, I just think that women in my generation have lived completely unnatural lives, and they've gone through things that women aren't supposed to, like, I think part of it is also just emotional and mental. Like, they're expected to go through things that they shouldn't have to go through, or deal with stuff that they're trying to, like, navigate. I think also, like, when you accept lies or you buy into propaganda, it just wears on you. I think the best way to maintain someone's health is to not believe lies. So if somebody says something that's a lie, say, yeah, I'm not going to believe it. And I get how, like, Solzhenitsyn, I know what he looked like after he got out of the labor camp. That's an exception. Like, we're not talking about you being put in the labor camp. I'm saying, like, when you accept lies or you embrace them, you have to engage in a lot of mental gymnastics, because so much of it is contradicted by reality.
Yeah, well, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, like, you could argue like that there was a purity of soul that he had. The Gulag Archipelago. I'm mispronouncing it.
Yeah,
was he stayed true to him being a dissident, like the whole. You know what I mean? He never wavered, as far as I can tell.
Right. And I think that like, I would look at a lot of people my age, and I just think that a lot of them aged very rapidly because of just, they bought into the lies. And I think part of it for me is genetics, because my grandpa has a baby face, and a lot of people I know have in my family have baby faces. So, like, we kind of have the men have a lot of youthful facial features that carry us through and make us appear much younger than we are. So I think that partly benefits me, but I think also just not buying into nonsense is what I don't look. If I shave, like, really well, I mean, I have people telling me I look like I'm in my mid-20s. Like,
you kind of, even with the beard, you kind of, it almost looks what's that word when something's out of time, an anathema.
Yeah.
The beard on you looks kind of strange, because you do have this really youthful appearance. I have this really, really full beard, kind of looks odd on you in a little way. Not bad. I mean, just
yeah. And that's kind of, I think that's just part of it. It's like, I didn't buy into a lot of the lies, so it didn't wear on my, like, it didn't wear on my psyche, so it doesn't show up in on your face. Whereas a lot of people I know, I mean, some of these girls, it's just like, you look like you're 50 and you're 27. Like,
well, I mean, I also wonder, like, there's a thing about like so many people being on, medication.
oh, dude, that's the other thing is like, not to disclose like medical information, but like I've never been on any kind of like serious medication of this kind. Whereas, at least in our region, the Pacific Northwest, it's a flip. It's a coin toss. It's a coin toss. Like you
Oh, it's
either
50-50 whether or not they're on like Prozac.
and I'm not talking about like, oh, they're taking like some sort of like pain. They're talking that I'm talking like something that's severely impacting their mental capacities.
Yeah, like they need this daily pill to just function. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that also wore on them, because why are they taking the drugs? Because they're dealing with a situation that they don't want to deal with. Well, they're dealing with it by taking drugs instead of just engaging in healthy behavior and saying, I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah, well, then we can get into this whole argument about is they crazy or is society crazy? So they're medicating for it. But we got to wrap up, TJ. I wanted some closing words from you. You are the wordsmith because you are an author. What have you got to say to take us out?
Well, I would say that keep pushing forward, and always remember that we can outlast them.
Okay, well, words of wisdom from my good friend TJ. By the way, check out the description below. You can catch all his links to all his works. And then from his main page, you can buy his books on Amazon, the whole bit, and find his podcasts, etc., etc. Anyway, thanks for being on, TJ. For those listening, please hit the like button. And if you found this enjoyable, subscribe and comment if you see fit. Thank you very much.